even in this house, the most dire, horrible events took place.
We are not content with the stories. So I listen with lives. Come. Be my victim.
Through watching scenes of violence, through watching scenes of transgression, through watching scenes of horror. There's an enormous amount of sort of abattoiral excess.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
Occasionally, we're hired to hunt down people who may have gone mad. It's a mixed bag around here. How are we doing tonight? Welcome to Double Feature Horror Show episode, I think 67, but I will know as soon as I click that button.
Didn't commit that to memory.
I do a lot of streams. I do a heck of a lot of streams.
That's true. That's true. It's true. You're nearly caught with laughing at the Guardian there, actually.
Really?
I'm on 73. Yeah.
I will
Hopefully
overtake
74
you.
next week. You will do soon. So I'm struggling to do them every 2 weeks at this point. So it might be sooner than you think.
It's fine. It's all good. It's all good. Okay, folks, we are at the end of our... I don't know where to look. This is very confusing. I have notes, I have books, and I have a webcam. So forgive me if I'm looking in the wrong place. But also, hi, I'm on camera. I tried to do this last week, and it didn't work. It messed up horribly. So let's hope this works. Let's hope it doesn't crash and freeze on a really awkward...
Oh,
frame.
very droll.
I didn't know if that would work. I didn't know if that worked at all.
Made me laugh.
Thank you. I'd like to think I got some of you. All right. Yeah, I thought this would be fun because I've got some fun stuff here. I thought I'd show you some of the research that arrived that helps us make this stuff. We have the Nightmare Movies, one of my favorite reference manuals from Kim Newman. This one goes up to 1988 from 1968. And I sort of filled the gap up to that with Ivan Butler's Horror in the Cinema, which goes from the silent era to 1968. I think that's pretty much the only reason that Kim Newman starts at 1968. I have a very niche tome indeed in the form of this beautiful book, which is What the Censor Saw by John Trevelyan, who you may be aware of via some BBFC history. I don't know if you guys are into that at all.
I was going to say, I remember that. I remember that.
John Trevelyan, this is his memoirs.
He was always the little squiggly signature at the bottom of the certificate before the film, wasn't he?
It is, yeah. That's how you get to know them. Like for me, it was James Furman. I always remember seeing James Furman's signature. Also, tell a lie. I realise I've actually brought the wrong book and I held up a copy of Far From the Madding Crowd, which is less helpful on matters of horror movies. We also have, to finish it off, 2 recent arrivals that are going to be informing future streams. We have the excellent H P Lovecraft and the Decline of the West from S.T. Joshi, who is basically the premier Lovecraft scholar. And, well, have you ever bought a book just for the title?
Yes.
What was that book, Haryan?
The Templars by Dan Jones, because I wanted to learn about the Templars.
That would do it. That would do it. I was sold on Men, Women, and Chainsaws.
Oh, that sounds like a good book.
It's a great title, isn't it? That is It's a feminist analysis of horror, and I just thought it would be really interesting to see what they say. We're probably going to have a topic on that, and I thought you guys might be interested in that. Before we go any further, though, we should introduce our guests. We do not have TCG tonight, unfortunately. My dude is ill. He is in a chat, I believe. If he is survived.
Am I usurping someone else's chair then?
Oh, well, I'm afraid he's got the coof, and so
Right.
He may not be with us much longer. So.
Oh dear, like Jeremy Vine. Poor old Jeremy Vine's got the coof, as he was telling us all this week, giving a performance worthy of Tom Hanks in Philadelphia on Twitter. There, the utter scumbag. Yes. Thank you very much for having me on. Pleasure, and I'm glad you offered me the opportunity to talk about a John Carpenter film, because let's face it, he's just good fun, isn't he? I was
Absolutely
getting in the mood before this, listening to he does a live retrospective of some of his film music from 2016. I found it on YouTube and just playing it through, and I just like the fact he's not dour or somber at all. He's not kind of some sort of weirdo kind of a horror filmmaker. He's just fun.
No, he's a really interesting guy. I thought he would be really dour, and then I saw him in Body Bags, where he basically had to throw together what was going to be a TV show into an anthology, and he just decides to play the version of like the Crypt Keeper. And he absolutely hams it up, camps it up. He goes way overboard. How is this John Carpenter? But he's having a great time. I couldn't believe it.
And the interesting thing is his films are kind of made for talking about and for a certain amount of critique. So being a bit of a bore in that way, I like that sort of thing.
Well, we do like obsessive talking about horror movies on this channel. We're fond of that. I don't think I actually even said your name, but hi, Simon Roberts.
I am Simon Roberts. Yes, it is my actual real name. Welcome to me.
You can't do that on the internet. It's illegal.
There you go. Yes, I mean, your question about books actually was interesting. I've never bought a book for its title, but I sometimes follow people on Twitter who have amusing account names. That sort of takes my fancy. The last person I followed for that was someone called Jemima Puddle Ducks Catamite, and I just thought that's just an amusing and pithy name.
Great. That is a great name.
Yeah.
Oh. Yes, I'm sort of racking my brain for similar follows that. Purely on the basis of the name. Oh, Lin-Manuel Rwanda. It was such a good name.
Exactly. It's the moment when whimsy just takes you away and says, yes, I'm going to reward that person with a follow.
Absolutely.
Or punish them, as it may be. Yeah.
Yeah. And Haryan, how are you doing?
Hello, what up, my drillers? I'm back for another Lovecraftian film. You know, one thing I'll say quite early about this film, it did that. It reminded me of Sharp in that the music I don't think fit the film, if that makes sense.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know why that just popped into my head while I'm introducing myself, but it was one of my takeaways from the film. Like in Sharp, they've got that electric guitar going out throughout the series, and you're like, this doesn't really fit 18th century to 19th century. Waterloo Napoleon fighting, but
no, I've completely forgotten that. I've meant to do a Sharp rewatch for ages. I really want to rewatch it, but
I watched. I think it was Sharp's Eagle. It's true. It's in basically every scene. It's in the intro as well. But this reminded me of that, where it was a film in the 90s, and you could tell just from the music.
Yeah, I'm going to be so weirded out by that. When I rewatch it, that's going to be really distracting. In this film, I gather there was a difficulty getting the music. So John Carpenter, as we've discussed, is always really involved in doing the music for his films. But he wanted to get a licensed song. I think Enter Sandman. This is just something I've gone off from Red Letter Media. I rewatched their coverage and they mentioned that, and I thought, oh, I mean, it's sort of odd for John Carpenter to use someone else's song, but it's fair enough.
Man's an artist.
I rather like his music. Somebody I was talking to the other day expressed to me that I thought it was terribly naff, but I quite like John Carpenter's music, especially him in the classics like Assault on Precinct 13 and Prince of Darkness. I must add, I'm not a massive horror film watcher. I mean, Prince of Darkness I last watched about 30 years ago with The Thing, so I know this film's part of that Apocalypse trilogy. But I love this film, actually. I like this sort of unabashed kind of, hard rock, sort of power mullet, hard rock that he did for this film. And it was very much like I rewarded myself last night as well with watching They Live for the first time. And you've got that kind of wonderful sort of prowling, slinky bass as he's getting off the train and walking into town. And a lot of his music's pretty simple, I suppose, from a musicological point of view, although I'm not a musician. But it's very it's wonderfully atmospheric, which is why I think it gets used a lot in Adam Curtis documentaries, who I'm a massive fan of, and so I think John Carpenter is suitable for any occasion.
I did not know that. I didn't know Adam Curtis used John Carpenter music.
He uses the intro title from Prince of Darkness, theme from The Fog. I think he uses bits from The Thing as well, in sort of because obviously he does lots of sort of montage of endless corridors, going off into the distance, people looking sort of miserable, international events and people dying horribly, and it's got a wonderful kind of undertow of sinister sort of propulsion, which I think is really nice. And I like the fact John Carpenter does his own music and says, screw you to people who want, to sell him their music for like $10,000 a second or whatever it is.
Yeah, he's very into it, and I think you're right. They're simple, but they are very effective. And I'm a fan of this. It starts off with, quite a kick, and it also kind of lets you in early. Like, don't take it too seriously. Like, we're going to go on a bit more of a lively vibe than usual. That's definitely how we start, but. Before we get into that, we should we have a little bit of shilling to do. We do it. We'll get the shilling out of the way, and then we will do in the topic and then the film. So to be polite and sit your grace, yes, Simon, is there anything you'd like to shill and just like get everyone informed about?
I haven't got anything to show at the moment. I have, well, both shows I'm doing are kind of on a long hiatus, let's say. I used to do a show called The Guff Stream with Hector Drummond on his channel. Our back catalogue is there if you can be bothered. And I have a channel of my own called The Difficult Second Album, which has proved so difficult. I haven't done any shows for months, but I'm hoping to restart that after the summer. So nothing else to shill. I mostly like other people's content, and so I'm going to enjoy it tonight and see what yours is like.
That's great. Well, you said you'd made notes, and to be honest, just saying you made notes straight into my heart. Anyone who says they've made notes, I'm like, yes.
I'm just a swat.
It's all good. And Haryan, anything to shill?
What did I make Tuesday? Oh yeah, that was it. You may be surprised to know that kids going into university want even less free speech at university. So I do a video covering that. I know, crazy, right? I know. People put through our education system don't understand the value of free speech. And so I go through that and explain this problem's only going to get worse. And guess what? These kids are going to go out into the real world and make your life a misery too.
No, they'll encounter the real world and then they'll wake up and buckle up. And how were we coping about this 5 years ago?
I don't know.
I'm trying to think what the cope was.
Very black-pilled on people get conservative as they get older. I don't know any time that's actually happened. I think
literally just the Overton window moves so far that people are left suddenly wondering, like, oh, wow, I'm in the conservative section. How did that happen?
I mean, I guess it makes sense as well. You do like to think, I get more reasonable as I grow up, but nah, it doesn't happen. Not really. Not really past the age of about 25.
Reject it, chat. Go unreasonable. I hope I pointed at you there, chat. I'm not used to this. I find it very baffling. Okay, and I will do my shilling, which I feel usually very awkward about. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to take a big sip of Steve Turley's patented shill juice. That powerful shilling tincture action is already taking effect. And I will try and do this without feeling awkward, which is to make a plea for memberships, basically. I felt really awkward and nervous opening this channel up for memberships and doing it on Subscribestar, but you guys were actually really lovely about it, and a whole bunch of you have signed up and joined as members, and I really appreciate it. And that's partially because as members, it's much more easy for me to get you the exclusive content and slip you the Easter eggs that I hide in the videos. If you're not a member, I hide nothing in the videos. You didn't hear that. But it also makes it a lot easier for me budgeting for the big project, which I really hope to make happen this year. Members is just so much easier for me to calculate that. So actually having a whole bunch of you join up, it's amazing. I really appreciate it, and I want to thank you. And challenge myself by setting something of a target. Ambitious maybe, but I would absolutely love it if we went up to 10 members by the end of July. That is, that'd be pretty awesome. So I figured I'd just put it out there. If you folks want to support the channel, if you want to make it happen, if you would like exclusive content and you want the secret project to be funded, then join me as a member either here or on Subscribestar if you want to keep your money out of Susan's pocket. The Alabaster, thank you. My first member on YouTube. You're an absolute star, and I'm glad you like the Easter eggs. I've got to put out the ones from the last video. They're very sneaky. I don't think anyone will find them, but if you do, I will be very flattered. Very impressed. So I thought I'd set that as a target. 10 members by the end of July would be absolutely amazing and be a really great start on the way to getting the secret project funded. I'm going to leave it there because I feel so awkward shilling. Give
her your money. Give her your money.
Yes, please do the thing. Or via here, link in the description, or via Subscribestar. Link is in there too. If you want to keep your money out of Susan's pockets, that would be awesome. And also, I do just want to say, for all this talk of shilling and money, also, everyone here now, you guys are actually amazing, because I would feel so awkward doing this if there weren't the sort of 18 or so regular people who are here every week. I would feel so awkward. I wouldn't be trying this. You guys are amazing by helping, so I really appreciate that. And that is the end of Shill Corner. I suppose the only thing I should say is I put out a video yesterday. Thank you, John. I need the encouragement. I do. I feel so weird doing it. Don't come natural to me.
It's the innate Britishness, isn't it?
It is.
You can't ever promote yourself. That's against the rules here in Britain.
Feels wrong and dirty.
You arrested.
Feels wrong and dirty and filthy. Segue time. But before I segue to the topic, I will just point out, if you didn't see it, I put out a video on Tuesday about hidden horror in Black Mirror. That is, there is a sort of a hidden theme in there that's quite deep, quite special. It's good analysis. And then on top of that analysis, I put loads of absolute filth, which I just thought was funny. So it's a mixed bag, but I think you'll like it. So that is the end of the shilling. And at this point, I think we could probably go into the topic if you guys are feeling ready.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, why? You've set it up. I'll listen to it. I'll listen to your third lecture on this. Oh no, it's your sixth.
It's
oh my
the
God.
sixth time I've talked to you for LGBT. Sorry, for the BBC. Damn it.
BBFC.
This shilling tincture really kind of tastes like stout. I don't know what's wrong with it. Anyway, all right, I'm going to knock off the camera because it's going to be really distracting, but I thought I'd test it out and say, hi, in-person chat, how are you doing? Right, camera is off, and we are going to talk about a very special topic, a very relevant topic, because I promised you in the sacred month of Pride that we would have gay-themed topics. And I didn't tell Simon because I wanted him to come on.
Oh yes, I'm deeply homophobic, of course. Yes, so I probably wouldn't have.
Good man.
I'm like I like to think I function as something of like a pass for everyone who comes.
I feel so betrayed.
Okay, this will be a fun one. I hope. So, do you recognise this film? No worries if you don't.
You know me, I don't know any films.
That's okay. That's okay. This is from Rope. I'm calling this 6th episode of BBFC History. Oh, 20 minutes on. Right, I can time myself. I'm going to try and do this in 25 minutes. I'm calling this LGBBFC, and I'm going to try and answer the question for you that I know has been on your mind. How did the BBFC go from firmly outlawing any sexuality of the homo kind whatsoever to punishing anyone who speaks out against pride, homosexuality, gay relationships, transness? How did they do that? How did that happen? It's quite the turnaround.
Now, I'm just going off instincts, but I get the feeling it's something to do with Tony Blair. They're just my instincts.
Yes. Oh yes.
Yes.
The first time we have managed to mention the chap on the channel, but we will get there. We will get there. Actually, this is going to be a little weird because I'm going to be wide ranging, usually with sort of taking it a decade at a time or periods of classifications at a time, which moves us in roughly 19-year blocks. But this is going to range over everything, and it's going to be quite focused. John, that they are not traps. That is from Blue is the Warmest Color, which I actually really. Oh, sorry, John, that's not your comment. That's from Blue is the Warmest Color, French film with Léa Seydoux. I really liked it. Saw it at the Prince Charles in London. Yeah, really, really good film.
Was it that pixelated on film?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Gross.
Okay. So we're going to start in 1916, which I think you will all remember. I'm going to go very quickly over this. This is our starting block, and that chap on the left is T.P. O'Connor. What does the P stand for? Power. His middle name is literally Power. Isn't that awesome? Nice. So as you'll remember, he had his 42 item list of things that could not be in the films. Gone. Banned. Not allowed at all. And in amongst those are scenes suggestive of immorality, which I gather was the sort of catch-all term for homosexual relations. Literally, the love that dare not speak its name. So, absolute ban in 1916.
Take me back. It's better than now. It's better than LGBT month.
Oh, I love calling it LGBT. Cracks me up.
Oh,
yes, Max Power. I thought you might like that. Any Simpsons
that's a Simpsons reference. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering I was trying to think. Where do I know Max Power? It's Simpsons, of course it is. Oh, how do I forget?
Now we move forward very quickly to 1948. Now we start to get a little risque here, a little cheeky. Your man on the left is Arthur Watkins, who I think we kind of breezed over before. Now, going to my notes, we've had a complete ban, right? So issue is closed. But there are many ways to skin a cat. And so we have quite a lot of suggestive films. So films like Rope from 1948 or Strangers on a Train from 1951, both Alfred Hitchcock, both amazing, absolutely love them. They are very gay coded. They're not explicit, but it's kind of hard to ignore gay undertones. The two chaps on the bottom right there are from Rope, and they were modelled after a pair of gay killers who were also lovers. Sorry, they were killers who were gay. They did not kill gays. Very important.
Boo.
Boo, indeed. They're also, was it Leopold and Loeb, I believe were their names, if you want to Google them. Kevin Williamson, writer of Scream, credited them as a minor inspiration. So via innuendo, Rope and Strangers of a Train, they managed to pass. However, Edward D. Wood Jr.'s Glen or Glenda, banned. Absolutely banned. Too on the nose, not subtle enough, absolutely banned to transvestism. Not in our cinema, thank you very much. That's 1958.
Huh.
Psycho manages to skirt by because, well, we'll skip over that because we want to save times. But 1951, we have Arthur Watkins leaving, and we get a new chap on board, John Trevelyan. And oh, thank you. Zoe has confirmed Leopold and Loeb. Thank you very much. That was on the back of was sagen wir es, leg mir auf die Zunge. Okay, so I had this quote up which I found in Trevelyan's book that I just felt was so amazing. Now I'm going to have to read off a book here. One of the books I didn't show was the history of the BBFC. And this was in reference to a film called The Killing of Sister George. Now, Trevelyan had a very interesting approach. Basically, the rules were there, but Trevelyan tended to think that if something was artistic, if it had artistic merit, the rules could be bent, which is where you get him saying, you know, this film had, he was talking about Belle de Jour in that case. The film had explicit sexual perversions, but its quality was undeniable. Now that is quite interesting. That is a foot in the door.
Yeah, surely that can just refer to everything.
Yeah.
You can say everything's got artistic, what do you say, artistic merit or something?
Artistic merit, yeah.
Yeah.
He's
the Last Jedi has artistic merit. It's still dog.
It's more how he would bend the rules. I'm actually quite sympathetic to this, to be honest with you. I think quite extreme material, if it is, how can I say, you wouldn't mind a very high level of violence if it was tied to something serious and artistic, you know,
not gratuitous. Not gratuitous.
Yeah. Is it purely salacious, or is it serving a deeper purpose, basically? I mean, I'm quite sympathetic to that.
Oh, I go on.
Sorry. You go, Harry.
I was just going to say, I think anything can be made and should be able to be put in a cinema, and with the BBFC it's kind of 18 plus. There shouldn't be any rules there. I mean, even the most hardcore decrepit people actually died in this film and it's on camera. I'm pretty libertarian in that way. So I'd probably go further than Trevelyan.
Would I be right in thinking this is a sort of period in the BBFC where they'd be talking about, look, we can have nudity in films, for example, as long as it's, artistically tasteful and necessary to the story, that kind of cliche. Is that sort of eruption?
Absolutely.
Right. Okay.
And Trevelyan is your guy who really led the way on that. Massively.
He's the liberalizer. Yeah.
He is. He's actually pretty much on record saying he didn't believe in censorship. But he was head of the BBFC, and Robert Conquest is just being so validated right now.
Oh.
I mean, I'm not wanting to sound harsh against the guy. He's interesting to study. I've got some interesting quotes from him here. Trevelyan pointed to a record of what the BBFC regarded as ever-increasing liberalism with regard to women's on-screen nudity. But it is, he said, a totally different matter when the context is one of lesbian physical love. He did not disclose why. Oh, BBFC. That's from their own book. Yes, and there's another one I really wanted to catch here. Oh, okay, so this is from that same period. A critic of the BBFC noted that Britain's censorship system began to resemble not so much a moral shield as a large colander. For all this reasonableness, we do end up, we know where we are today, and so you get a quote from Trevelyan, which is quite interesting. In the board's defence, Trevelyan told the clerk of one county council that while it was appropriate to increase liberality, the board should nevertheless keep a reasonable control. Otherwise, the position could quickly get out of hand, and the cinema would be showing pornographic films.
Oh no.
Now, Harry, and I know you and I are quite different on this, so it's why when we do have the censorship discussion,
Yes,
I'm going to allow a lot of time for it. We might review a trailer, and then
yeah. I mean, I was having this conversation with my girlfriend and mum the other day because we were talking about someone who was on Love Island, and Love Island is basically just really softcore porn for TV. And it even made my mum go, oh, you know, maybe Mary Whitehouse had a bit of a point.
based.
Which I think saying, look, some of these things shouldn't be on TV before 9 p.m. I think having the watershed's fine, and then after that, put porn or whatever up. But Love Island's on before 9 sometimes. They certainly show highlights of it. And they show adverts of it all the time, and I'm like, you can't get away from Love Island. I don't know why it's so popular, apart from you get to see some hot people. Because I think, women obviously watch it more than men. Come on,
Mima, I'm going to be honest with you, mate. It's going to get a bit worse. We're going to use a lot of euphemism. So this is maybe the biggest switch around in things. So we start in 1961. The really important film here is Victim. Have either of you heard of that? And don't worry if you haven't.
It's the Dirk Bogarde film, isn't it? I've heard of it.
Yes.
But other than that, I can see it's actually on the poster there. I didn't read it off the poster, everyone. I know I had heard of it. Yeah, this is. This is kind of sort of breakthrough film, wasn't it? It's in my memory, but I don't know much else other than that.
That's cool. It's very much a campaigning film, and quite famous. It was going a lot further than what was allowed at the time, and the BBFC insisted on making some quite severe cuts. So that's exaggerating. Basically, they make the cuts that Disney make to their films for Chinese release now. So quite mild references to explicitly confirming character's sexuality and the sexuality of a younger boy. But nevertheless, with those lines cut out, they passed it with an X certificate. And the idea of Victim was very much to point out that because sodomy was illegal, that you could be blackmailed if you were known to be a homosexual. So it was very much basically campaigning for that situation to change, which led, well, I think you can say it was somewhat successful. Now, the BBFC justified their decision with a quote I've got there: "To the great majority of cinemagoers, homosexuality is outside their direct experience and something which is shocking, distasteful, and disgusting." 1961, okay? 1967, the Sexual Offences Act passes and sodomy is no longer criminal, meaning effectively you can't be blackmailed for it. 2 years later, you get the Killing of Sister George, which, as we mentioned, was passed with some minor cuts, but was a lot more explicit, and Women in Love with Oliver Reed, which has a nude male wrestling scene dripped in homoeroticism. Minor cuts for that, but it also passed. So that is a change. By the way, the first of those was in 68 and the second is in 69. Nice. Okay. Quite the turnaround in 8 years there. Turnaround.
It doesn't happen in isolation, does it, though, just in film? Because it's really, you've got to probably relate this at the time to what's happening in theatre as well. You've got Joe Orton happening in the meantime. You've got Entertaining Mr. Sloan, which is 1963, which is very interesting film, by the way, if you want to go and watch the Entertaining Mr. Sloan film from 1970.
I do not know it. That's interesting.
It's very, very. I watched it the first time recently because we were doing a theatre review thing on the AA channel, and he mentioned it was one of his favourite plays, and I went and watched it, and it's very on the nose. with particular scene where there's this sort of there's a chap who plays a sort of very tightly closeted homosexual and Mr. Sloane, and they're having this, like you say, coded conversation about enjoying sport. And it's a brilliant scene. Just for that one scene, watch the film. You can find it online if you go to naughty pirating sites like I did, which just allow you to stream it. But it's actually very, very enjoyable. But you can see it's although it's made in 1970, for 1963 in the theatre at the time, you could see why Joe Orton would have made the impact he did, because he wasn't hiding anything anymore. It was quite sort of, you could see it would be quite outrageous for the time, let's say.
So is that conversation that they had a bit like the one in Spartacus about
oysters and
oysters?
snails? It's even more. It's sort of ladles it on even more, but it's Mr. Sloane's kind of reclining sort of in his underpants on the bed, and this fella's coming in his tweed jacket and his pipe, looking, trying not to look, but obviously looking, as it were, and they're having this very tense conversation about you enjoy a bit of rugby, this kind of stuff, bit of tussling, and it's just hilariously funny, and you can see it's that thing of you can get things through if you make people laugh and make them think a bit.
Oh, I am intrigued by that. I'm very intrigued. Okay. So, oh dear. So Trevelyan very much opens the way, and then as I've just got on this slide here, the artistic exemption becomes the educational exemption. This is a film I'm going to have trouble talking about in a family-friendly way. It's Taxi zum Klo, or Taxi to the Lose, if you will, about the gay scene in Berlin in the 80s. This comes out in 1980, I believe itself, when John Trevelyan has passed on, I believe. And we now have this chap whose signature you'll be very familiar with, James Furman. Now, Taxi zum Klo was having trouble getting released, and what's a good way to gosh. There's a scene where a chap is providing another chap with a very refreshing hot drink. If you're following me.
Is it
completely undetectable innuendo?
Thank you. Yes.
Sort of warmed up apple juice, I believe, something like that.
Yeah. It's something of that nature. Nice. So that was obviously getting banned. And there's also a scene where a chap takes a young boy. He puts his hand on a younger boy's crotch and then takes the younger boy's hand and puts it down his pants. That's also a bit of a problem. However, they spoke to the filmmakers, who told them that it was a dummy child's crotch. Susan's going to love this, isn't she? This is film criticism, Susan. Film criticism. Don't do this to me.
The interesting thing about this, looking at this poster here, is the notorious hit of the New York Film Festival. Do you think this is the sort of first time where you get this idea of it's being recommended by this, très sophistiqué film festival, because obviously we have like the Tribeca Film Festival now, don't we? De Niro's little outfit, and you've got Sundance and stuff. So these things are kind of like imprimatur of artistic kind of initiative or excellence, aren't they? So you say, it's the hit of this particular indie film festival. Do you think this is the sort of first time this is coming in, this kind of, this kind of nudge from the New York scene saying, you must watch this. This is terribly challenging and sophisticated.
Oh, yeah. It's very educational. Yeah, it could be. I mean, I always think there's been some guise of sophistication. There's that scene in Boardwalk Empire where a chap is trying to convince his wife to do something a bit filth. And he says it's what they're all doing in Paris.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I guess it's like an updated version of that in the sort of mid to late 20th century, isn't it? This this thing of it's a hit over here, so this kind of begins to sort of protrude into English culture, let's say, as a result of being it's being seen to be done elsewhere. So you guys need to catch up, and that's kind of part of the marketing process now. I mean, it just struck me that you didn't see other sort of feature films before this, or other even independent films being kind of recommended in that way in the publicity. it would usually be this kind of the press quotes or something, rather than saying, well, these terribly sophisticated people over here liked it, so you should too.
Yeah, it's a very different form of advertising from, it's a blockbuster hit sweeping the nation, rather than, very smart people enjoy this.
Yeah, it's a little bit sort of gonzo looking with the marketing there. That's an unusual kind of poster for that period, I would say.
I would be interested to look into that style of marketing, to be honest. So people have got it. They also said, I messed that up. Oh no. This is a trouble with using euphemism here. They also said that the child's hand going into the chap's trousers was actually an older woman's hand. They used a stunt hand. Now, that may or may not be true. Let's assume it is, but even though it had the appearance of being abuse, they said it was faked, and so the BBFC said, okay. And they basically passed this. Now, it would have been banned except for the fact that the BBFC decreed that because it was about an interesting cultural situation, so Berlin in the 80s, it had educational value. And therefore, it was fine to put this out. That may sound very familiar to you if you remember our Friday the 13th stream, when he talked about how the director Sean Cunningham used to make white lab coat movies, which was effectively softcore porn disguised by having a chap in a lab coat introduce it and say they were talking about Norwegian marriage practices. And then, chap in a lab coat comes in at the start, then at the end, and says, well, now you've seen these techniques, you can maybe use them to improve your own marriage.
It's probably I'm probably gonna have to say that's my girlfriend from now on. Oh, what you doing? Oh, just watching an educational film. Don't worry about it.
Literally the kind of film that Travis Bickle takes what's her name, Sybil Shepherd to in Taxi Driver. It's that kind of movie.
I hear the high class socialites in Norway love these educational films, darling. Don't worry about it.
Absolutely. So yes, we now have an exemption for this conduct via it being educational. Okay. But still, how do we get here? So we've got permissiveness. That's absolutely fine. Every sort of aspect of cinematic content has effectively liberalized over the course of the BBFC. But this is a really interesting one. How do we get to a film like Dashcam from 2022 being condemned and rated up because it uses discriminatory language? How do we get there? Well, because it's quite a turnaround. It's quite a turnaround from homosexuality is immoral, ban it, to criticism is immoral, ban it. And I feel at this point, I do need to wave my invert card, just in case anyone had not caught on here. You feel you sort of have to when you're addressing this topic in this way. And it's down to this guy. Oh, yes.
Oh my God.
We finally got to talk about him.
Yeah. And we've only got 2 minutes to talk about him. Oh, no.
Oh, no. Oh, okay. That is Tony Blair. And basically the short story is, how did this happen? And the answer is the Human Rights Act, 1998.
97, isn't it?
Oh, it might have been 97 coming into force in 1998. Give it a Google.
Right.
Now, similar to the 1967 Sexual Offences
It
Act.
is 98. I'm wrong. Sorry. Ignore me.
That's okay. Sorry. Residual law memory.
Mm-hmm.
Similar to the 67 Sexual Offences Act coming in, the 1998 Human Rights Act comes in. Effectively, discrimination is a no-no. And this ends up filtering through to the BBFC. James Furman, from what I can tell, and I need to do more reading, seemed to have been forced out. There were lots of briefings and leaks against him. You got lots of stories coming out in the press. criticizing the way he does things, even though he, as far as I can tell, seems to basically continue Trevelyan's practices. So I really don't get why they were so against him. And he gets replaced with a chap called Robin Duvall in 1999. So 1 year after the passage of the Human Rights Act. And Robin Duvall decides that they need to revamp things, they need to shake it up, and they start doing some research. And they do these citizens' juries to basically assess their standards. The reports are quite easily found online. If you want to look up Schlesinger Research's records of this. And they basically go over all the controversial issues and ask, what do you think of our standards? What do you think of how we've rated these movies? But because of the Human Rights Act, they start from the premise that there can be no discrimination. It is absolutely, what's the phrase? Not allowed. It's banned. It's off. It's not an option. Okay, so they get a new axiomatic assumption. And then they're quite interesting in that they try and justify this through consulting the public. But then the research will also say that where the public didn't have a problem, they need to listen to special interests. It's quite interesting that they use the public to justify changes that they wanted to make. And then when the public aren't on board, they find a different reason.
It's like Brett saying about democracy, isn't it? You know, when the one with the old public don't work, you just get a new public.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic, yes. Their 1999 annual report has this quotation. The survey of public opinion reaches every type of viewer, but its inevitable focus on what the majority thinks may distract us from considering vulnerable minorities. Many of the respondents too may not have given much thought to their answers. You dummy, you dumbass, that's a wrong opinion. They would say, reasonably enough, that they have had better things to think about. Sassy. The technique of using citizens' juries rectifies this last shortcoming. However, it may be thought that people who can spare the time to serve are not truly representative of the country as a whole. But who cares? Because the citizens' juries reports justified all the changes that were made. So you'll also note that all the liberalizing was justified because of public opinion. But then, as I've said, these special anti-discrimination measures were justified without or in spite of public opinion. Cracks me up. But there's also a notable interesting thing here, as I race to hurry the topic, that they actually published their guidelines for the first time in 2000 as a result of that, which was quite fun. And I think I have read that, so I will skip past it. And then we get into 2004. Robin Duvall is not around very long. He doesn't last. We see a quick replacement from David Cook. David Cook steps in and is replaced by current chap David Austin. I may have that the wrong way round. And they basically enforce what the new standard is, which is we will treat all relationships, regardless of homosexual or heterosexual, as equal. And criticism of it is basically grounds for your film being basically banned. So the guidelines say basically you cannot include discrimination unless you are explicitly warning against it and criticizing it in your film. So a few films that happen to Pride, they discuss that approach in that from 2014. 2018, Wren Boys, BBFC notes that homophobic language added to the rating, but the film does not intend to be homophobic. 2021's I Am Samuel, which was a documentary about a gay chap in Kenya, was permitted to use discriminatory language on the basis that it was criticizing it and so on. So it effectively cements a new worldview. And it's kind of awkward that I couldn't get something from 2016 where this happened to, because then I could say like in the course of 100 years, but they actually managed it in 98, which is good going, to completely flip around the perspective of the BBFC.
Well, it's a hell of a tool.
Yep.
I'd say we get rid of it.
Oh, no. And that is a race through the BBFC history part 6 in 30 minutes and 28 seconds.
And interestingly, this sort of moment of crossing this artistic Rubicon from the tradition of Shakespeare, art being to hold as 'twere the mirror up to nature, to within a very short space of time. I mean, it's almost like I want to reach for a phrase like, I don't know, culture is downstream from law. Maybe somebody else said that, I don't know. But that's exactly what's happened here. And you've now sort of propagated a new mandatory form of art that is essentially insisting that it all becomes propaganda. It all has to, at some point, have a normative vision behind it. It doesn't just simply represent, you could have characters who speak with homophobic language or express violence, but this is not an endorsement, and yet now it's saying that any representation is potentially an endorsement and so needs to be curbed by guidelines, by regulation. And this essentially has popped through with barely an objection from the artistic community. You say, well, hang on. It's not really up to you to kind of police content in this way, to infer that people make a certain kind of judgment on content. That's undermining us as artists, surely.
You'd think they'd have a problem with that.
You'd think.
The interesting thing is one of the big criticisms of the 1916 42 rules, it might be 46 actually, is they are very explicitly pushing a perspective, a narrative. All of it is like, if you say, oh, violence, not for kids, that is a perspective. It may be one that's incredibly widely held, but it's a perspective. But you have stuff like, you cannot disparage the King's Guard, no mockery of Christ, and so on. It's very much a patriotic, Christian perspective, and very specific. And they criticize that. They took that away and wanted to make it more neutral. But now, yes, we find ourselves with a new moral.
Then they went the other way. Yeah.
Well, as I've said in my own videos, that it's sort of like the tolerance was sort of an excuse for just dismantling the previous code. And the new one does not get requirements of tolerance applied to it.
Yes, I mean, I should have said that. I should have prefaced my comments just now with that. Obviously, there's always been constraints, especially on highly commercialized art like film, things like the Hays Code in America in the 20s,
yes.
and obviously our own particular codes that you alluded to. But this is obviously a situation where we've lived, through this period of the 60s and 70s, where artists have been really going to town on emphasizing, look how hyper liberal and tolerant we are, and how sort of free thinking and wide ranging our artistic subjects are. And then all of a sudden it comes to the Blair government there, and they all suddenly fall into line and say, no, we're no longer quite as wide ranging and free thinking as you may have been led to believe by the 60s and 70s. So now we're all towing the line very firmly. Thank you very much. And by the way, our funding depends on it.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I'm not saying the Blair government forced James Furman out by briefing against him, leaking documents, say multiple articles in The Guardian complaining about him. I would never suggest that. I couldn't resist it. I had to do the awkward pause there. Okay, fantastic. So that is BBFC History Part 6. I don't think I have another one, do I? Oh, I was hoping to cap this off by showing that the BBFC had changed their Twitter logo for the rainbow one, but they haven't. Disgraceful BBFC.
Really?
Get on it, you absolute racists. No, they haven't done it.
No, that's homophobic, not racist. You're getting the wrong buzzword there. Come on.
Oh, no. You've seen the new flag, Haryan. Come on.
Which new flag?
Look.
I don't know if I've seen the new flag. There's one every day.
Look, they're using the old rainbow flag icon there in their tweet there. Disgraceful. That's like at least 4 flags ago.
Oh, they got to keep up with the cool kids, clearly.
I will actually say here that Pride
support the miners in the back.
Yeah, Pride is about lesbians and gays support the miners, a campaign. I mean, I'll put my hands up here. I absolutely love this film. It's your classic sort of 90s Richard Curtis style Brit comedy vibe, but gay and about the miners. And I loved it. It's shameless propaganda, but I loved the vibe. Dominic West is in it. Andrew Scott is in it. It's a good time. It's very funny. Yeah. Nice. So it's. I'm not saying it's flawless, but I just really loved. I really loved this film. I'd highly recommend it. So yes, they kind of fall into line. Right, we should get on with talking about the film 1 hour into this stream.
Oh yeah, we had a film. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was it?
The Mouth of Madness. The Mouth of Madness.
Yes. I keep just calling it The Mouth of Madness. It's in the Mouth of Madness.
Yes. Do you know why it's called that?
No.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna Murgu. You've got 10 seconds to tell us why it is called In the Mouth of Madness, because I think he's going to get on it. So while I'm waiting for Murgu to explain the title and awkwardly leaving that space, I'll give a little bit of background to it. Or Simon, would you like to give some background to the film? I think you looked it up.
I don't know how much background I can give to the film in terms of why John Carpenter was prompted to make this film at this time. Although I think it's very interesting in that it's kind of we talked before I came on about different genres like horror and meta horror. And it's kind of, I don't know, maybe it falls somewhere between the two in a way, because it is a kind of commentary on culture, really, for me, more than anything else. And I suppose, as I say, I've scribbled notes and reams of notes on this stuff. And I was trying to think of, can I sort of summarize it in 25 words or less? And I hate doing that because I'd rather just blather on for hours. But I thought the sort of thing that came out of the film for me was that the idea that, the more you participate in culture, the more you kind of reinforce your own imprisonment. I think that's what the film is kind of alluding to. And it's this pop culture that depends on this recursion and addiction and going back to it time and time again, because it's all based around a sort of a not so subtle jab at the author Stephen King, and the sort of massive phenomenal success he had. I mean, I was aware of it certainly in the early 80s, actually, although this film was made in 1994. But the way that King himself became this sort of overwhelming cultural phenomenon, it was kind of odd, really, because in a way, a little bit like the character in They Live that I was watching last night. I wasn't into horror. I wasn't into Stephen King, but it seemed like literally everybody was into Stephen King. The posters for his books were everywhere. People were always reading Stephen King books. Have you read this one? Have you read that one? And I was a bit like the character in They Live, wandering around like with a pair of glasses, where I could see everybody kind of going mad over Stephen King. and sort of feeling this was kind of slightly weird. There was this sort of obsessional quality with this new pop culture, and I think that's what In the Mouth of Madness is kind of driving at. I mean, there's many ways you can sort of parse and chop up and talk about different scenes in the film and how it looks like that, but it's that moment where pop culture and horror in particular becomes a kind of currency and a phenomenon. But for the first time, it's coming under the lens of psychoanalysis as well, because don't forget this is the era of antidepressants and American the Merck and the DSM-4 or whatever are coming in, and people are starting to get into sort of judging their own mental health, and you've got like novels like Prozac Nation was a bestseller at this time. I remember friends having it, and so there's lots of themes in the film about culture, mental illness, addiction, and now we're on our own. What happened there? I'm just talking to the boy. You're back.
Sorry. I tried to move the mic to get it closer.
Yeah,
And
I know I'm boring,
died.
but really, that's just rude.
Sorry, Simon.
No,
What you're saying was ringing a bell, though. Like the 90s, Stephen King was the big guy. He was the Rowling.
Massive.
You know,
Massive.
you couldn't escape it. How many? Even if you weren't into horror, you saw that there were TV movies constantly, right?
Yeah, and it was the repetition as well. Like I use that word recursion. There's this phenomenon in the film. Like we talked a little bit before we came on air about, certain scenes where they happen again and again and again. And the thing about King, of course, was the marketing latched onto the first time for this thing of, the covers of the books would all be very, very similar. You would be signaled very strongly. This is a Stephen King novel, and there would be particular color codes and font codes and image codes that would sort of hammer you from every angle. And watching this film was interesting because it was a bit like being around, as I say, even in the early 80s, you would walk into bookstores or down the street and there'd be posters for these books like everywhere. And everybody would have a copy of the latest King novel. And so there was this sort of feeling of it being sort of omnipresent. And at the same time, the film's it's kind of looking into themes of the author himself, sort of trapped behind the screen, in this film. You've got like John Trent, the main character, in the first part of the film. I mean, he's literally being put behind a glass, by a door in an asylum, so he's sort of peering out from behind the screen. So, King gets to be so big that he kind of gets trapped by his own fame and becomes this kind of eccentric character. I don't know if masses about King, but I've read a little bit about him, and he's obviously he's his own man, let's say, to be fair. And this is sort of part of this, phenomenalization of the focus on the individual, but an individual that's becoming sort of increasingly isolated by this, the very private phenomenon of reading. And also at the same time, the massive sort of outgrowth of a corporatization of the culture of, for instance, horror, in novel form. Films are another thing, but I mean, I think they make a joke about that in this film as well, don't they? They say, well, it's also out as a movie as well now, so, you kind of can't escape the form of the thing. It's like, it's like the culture happens to you. It's like there's a scene in the film, when they're going to look for Hobbs End. In the film, and you have the night drive sequence, and there's a bit where she the character Styles, she takes over driving the car from the Trent character played by Sam Neill, and she kind of goes into a sort of hallucination, and she ends up driving. She thinks she's driving up in the clouds, and then she's driving through this sort of massive tunnel, and then she sort of comes out of the tunnel at the end, and suddenly it's daylight, and he wakes up and says, you've got us here, brilliant. And it's this phenomenon of, you don't have to try, the culture takes you there. Once you participate, you're on a kind of unstoppable train. And this thing of the hyper commercialization and the corporatization of it as well, which the film is talking about, is part of this kind of psychosis. So you've got this, as I say, this time of American breakdown of, the reinforcement of the idea of mental illness. And when we talked about doing this film, I'd mentioned to you about this film comes in the wake of the kind of the late 70s, early 80s moral majority panic in America. Where you had the panic about, about heavy metal music, and about, video nasties in England, films like I Spit on Your Grave and stuff like that, sort of slasher films. And of course, as you get into the 90s, you get the moral majority panics move on to things like rap music. And you all remember probably like the parental advisory stickers that you would see on CDs and cassettes.
Very well.
Yeah. So, so it's throwing a number of different things together, but I've probably talked enough. But I mean, that's kind of more or less a sort of summary of what I'm seeing in this. There's a lot of the hollowing out of culture being replaced by this thing you see in the opening credits, the hot metal of the print presses. It's the process of media.
Oh, it's the industrialization. It's the mass of it, the mass and scale.
Yeah, speed,
absolutely.
Repetition, and it's it's not just the theme of the film. It's the dynamic of the way life is lived, and that's the interesting thing. But again, I'll back off now.
You're absolutely grand. I did see that Mergoot, before I derped my mic, actually got the answer out there, which is fantastic. Where is it, Mergoot? You did give the answer. There we go. It is called In the Mouth of Madness because it's close to At the Mountains of Madness, and also Oh, not that it's. Help me out here. Not Dunwich Horror, Innsmouth. What's the Innsmouth title? My brain has gone blank. Haunting it.
I'll just help
Shadow over Innsmouth.
Yeah,
Shadow
I don't know
over
anything about
Innsmouth.
Lovecraft.
There we go.
Yeah.
That's it. Sorry, my brain goes a bit blank. Yes, Shadow over Innsmouth. So that Innsmouth in the mouth and madness is in there. That's why it has that title. Sorry, I struggled with that. Yeah, there's deep stuff in here. There's a lot of contemporary cultural commentary. So there's something very clearly referencing Rodney King's beating in 1991. Or was it 1992?
LA riots, 92.
92, thank you.
Actually, hang on, the riots were in 92. Yeah, it was 92. Yeah, I remember.
Okay, yeah. So
I remember because I went to the
released.
cinema that year. Actually, I saw a film called Grand Canyon with Steve Martin, and it was weirdly, because I mean the film must have been made within that previous year, and it was about the situation in LA of sort of racial and political tensions, like people coming to the boil and getting violent. And it was like literally a week later the LA riots happened, and they burned down $1 billion of LA real estate. So it was kind of weirdly on the money at the time. Sorry, bit of a digression.
YouTube policies prevent me from responding honestly.
Oh no.
No.
Yeah, no comment.
So we've mentioned briefly that it's from 1994. This John Carpenter, not working off his own script, and I do have a lot of affection for John Carpenter, usually works out for the best. It's a script from a chap called Michael DeLuca, who only wrote 2 scripts before going to be president of production over at New Line. So he's done a pretty good job with this, I feel. These are some really complex ideas, I think, bolstered by Carpenter. But we're going to cover them as we go. But it's dealing with a lot. It's obviously referencing Stephen King. Something that confuses me is, given how much it's interested in Stephen King as a phenomenon, why it insists on using Lovecraftian horror. And that is something I don't really have a good answer for. And I've been trying to get my brain around it.
Because Lovecraft's better than King. Someone had to say it.
I wonder if it's a thing about, in a way, King is channeling Lovecraft, as he obviously is with, say, It. The description of the cosmic entities in It are incredibly Lovecraftian. Novels like the Tommyknockers, which are straight up modernizings of color out of space. So it could be that, the idea that there's this ancient form of the fiction that comes through into the modern, just as Sutter Kane basically finds himself taken over by an ancient power. I wonder if that is a parallel they're going for.
Can I take a stab at this? Because I obviously make a point of coming onto streams and being incredibly badly informed about most things. But with Lovecraft, and I've not read any Lovecraft, so I'll state that. But I sort of picked up sense of certain themes in Lovecraft. I mean, is there a sort of a theme in Lovecraft about, sort of deep buried evil and sort of, sort of tentacular creatures kind of, grasping at us out of the dark? Because I thought there was sort of elements that I could recognize from what I knew of Lovecraft lore in this film. He's kind of, there's the scene where, he escapes from Sutter Kane and he's kind of literally being chased by creatures with like tentacles coming out of their face. They're kind of Cthulhu-like creatures. And this is, I see this thing about Stephen King is kind of like, in a way, I mean, I think what I understand of Stephen King was he came in at a time where people were saying, I think somebody famously said his horror was like Peyton Place meets Dracula. Peyton Place was like a long-running American soap opera. And so it was the kind of thing where he writes kind of really insightfully, I guess, about human behavior and sort of bases it in kind of, middle America, suburban settings, the sort of the danger in the cornfield kind of thing, the thing that's lurking, in the basement of the middle class house, that kind of sort of sense of horror. And I think it's like, maybe it's saying something that King is kind of like a sort of trite kind of corporatized form of horror, whereas Lovecraft reaches, as it seems to suggest, back into something deeper and darker and kind of more disturbing. in a way, and it's kind of it's reaching out at you from the dark. And I think the idea there is to tie it back to my theme of like mental illness in America. It's kind of like Freud's monsters from the id. It's the idea that he's literally running away in that scene from Sutter Kane and from these kind of monsters from the id. The kind of it's a kind of Freudian kind of reading I'm sort of bringing into it here, but it's this idea that the real sort of disturbing stuff is kind of very deeply buried in the American psyche, and King as a kind of way of exporting that into a commercial form, but it doesn't necessarily reach quite as deeply as you say, Haryan, that Lovecraft maybe is a better writer, maybe he's a better practitioner of horror. Could you speak to that? I don't know.
From what I've read a bit of King and I've read a bit of Lovecraft. I don't think I've read enough to be an authority on it. I know I prefer Lovecraft because didn't when Stephen King writes, doesn't he basically go on a massive drug and drink binge and then write? And edits it in the morning, basically.
He was an alcoholic, wasn't he? The Wikipedia entry on him I read is very coy. It says, he was an alcoholic for more than a decade. But my calculation in the Wikipedia article was about 30 years. He was an alcoholic or something by the sound.
Yeah,
I could be wrong.
His book on writing is a bit more explicit about it. He talks about it very candidly. He became an alcoholic and then he got addicted to cocaine. And there's a period up to the I'm going to say just before the early 90s. He is at his worst and he's writing novels that he doesn't even remember writing. So Cujo is one of those. And themes of addiction, tearing a family apart, are just constant throughout that period. But he cleans himself up. But he does make the horror a lot more accessible, whereas what I like about Lovecraft is he consistently gets a horror that you cannot get your brain around. It is beyond your comprehension, and that speaks to me very much of monsters from the id. It's it's those things that we aren't aware of that drive us, and it takes away the idea of us as rational, as mechanical beings. It's like, no, there are forces that are in control of us that we are not in control of. And that feeds back to something like Haidt's theory of morality of the elephant and the rider, of we like to think we are a rational being controlling the direction of this elephant, but the elephant has a power. That was maybe very incoherent for people. I hope they followed that.
I understood, but that's because I've read The Righteous Mind. So
okay, effectively treat Lovecraft's scary, violent, disturbing, mind-warping monsters as a stand-in for our kind of deeply inbuilt evolutionary instincts that have far more control of us than we actually have over ourselves. That's what I'm trying to get at.
And on the kind of King versus Lovecraft debate, I guess. Stephen King seems to write books that turn into very good movies that are better than the books.
Whoa!
Hour.
Slow down there,
Lovecraft seems to be the other way around, where he wrote incredible books, and even like the really good films, I'd still probably say, read the books.
I would say about King, I think he does normal life incredibly well.
Yeah.
That's what coaxes you in, is just that sense of normality. Is brilliant. He's really good at that. And then from there he twists it. Whereas Lovecraft always distances you. So you often read a report of an incident. And from the start it's setting you up for something disturbing. Because he's got to condense everything. His stories are very short. He rarely wrote over things over 100 pages in length, so he basically has to get to it.
Well, he was a bit like Robert Heinlein. He was writing books to pay the bills, basically. So they're not, most of them anyway, aren't overly long. And if they were long, it's because they were split into about 8 parts.
True.
So,
That's some of the background of it. We should let's take people through the motions of the story, and let's sort of do it in an act basis, and we'll hit on the themes as we get to them. So Oh, and there's something I didn't ask first that I really should have asked. Haryan, had you ever heard of this film before? What's your experience with In the Mouth of
No,
Madness?
this is completely new for me. Never heard of it. Well, I say I hadn't heard of it. I recognise the title, but I realise now I recognise the title because it's close to, At the Mountains of Madness. And that's what I think I was thinking of. But apart from that, no, I didn't know anything about this film.
Okay. And Simon?
No. I do remember it at the time. I remember the posters very clearly because I would sort of see them around the place, like on the underground or stuff like that, in London. So I was aware it was there, but I was never, as I said, I've never been a sort of. No, I'm not a horror fan. I'll watch horror films, but I'll sort of watch the interesting ones, And John Carpenter definitely falls into this sort of interesting category for me. But no, I didn't know about it. But actually, I found there was a lot more of interest in it once I actually did watch it. To prepare for the stream. I think there's actually quite a rich seam in this film to be mined.
No, absolutely. It doesn't get the attention. In fairness, it was very slow to get a DVD release, and I just basically find that people haven't seen it. And I completely get why Halloween and The Thing get all the attention, but I just wish this would get some love. Like, this for me is on an equal, maybe slightly below The Thing, because there are some rough bits, but
well, it's different, isn't it? As I say, it's kind of like, it's not quite horror, it's sort of meta horror in a way, isn't it? But it's commentary on the business of producing culture and horror, isn't it? That's what it's kind of got. And I think from what I read about Carpenter, again, I sort of cribbed a lot from just reading his wiki entry and seeing apparently the 90s were kind of a career slump for him. Is that right?
He did struggle. I mean, he has struggled, I think, all the way throughout his career, but he was definitely on a high in the 80s that he struggled to reach. There's also a weird thing that I think maybe you don't get if you come to it afresh. Especially if you're a bit younger. I don't know how many of the Stephen King adaptations you watched, but when I watch this, I'm very conscious that Carpenter is sort of not pastiching, but almost saying, look, I can do the Stephen King thing too. Just like demonstrating he can handle that. He's not going to make a film out of it.
He knows the tropes, doesn't he? He knows the forms very well.
Yes, absolutely. He knows the forms. Yeah, that's a very good way of framing it.
And not just in literary terms, I'm guessing, but probably filmic terms, because there seems to be a lot of, little hints, little pastiches, little callbacks to almost other films of horror genre. I mean, I picked up bits in this film that were like taken from bits of Cronenberg films, bits that were taken, the one scene where you've got Styles sort of going completely Exorcist later on in the film. She starts doing the spider walk with a twisty head. And there's other little sort of allusions to other films of the genre. I mean, if we're talking about sort of going through the story of the film, when you start at the beginning in the Saperstein Asylum, where our hero John Trent is being, admitted, I thought, because this is just a few years after Silence of the Lambs has come out, and you think, well, they've deliberately made Saperstein, the Doctor, look a little bit like Dr. Chilton in Silence of the Lambs, and they've given him the same sort of sadistic. The same sort of sadistic sort of perversity. He does this thing of like, he admits the guy who's, Sam Neill's dragged in, and he kicks the guards in the groin, and he's chucked into his cell, and then the Doctor kind of smiles sadistically, and he starts playing the music.
I never put that together. I had never connected that to Chilton.
It's very similar to the scene in Silence of the Lambs, where Lecter's in his cell and saying, oh, he's torturing me today because he's put on this televangelist on the TV, and when you go, he'll turn the sound up.
I had never made that connection. That's fantastic.
So it's kind of having little sort of it's drawing in little elements of genre as well, to kind of create the architecture of the film and the moods and the like we said, the forms and the tropes, and that's why I think you say Carpenter's obviously observed a lot of what's gone on in the business to put this stuff together. Even even a little bit later on, I always felt there's the scene. I'm sort of jumping about a bit here, but you know, when they're on the night drive and they see the kid in the denims on the bicycle. First of all, you know, he's a young kid, and then he's aged, you know, and he's still riding the bicycle. And I felt there's something about that, the way that kid's riding that bicycle, that reminds me of the kids in E.T. You know, it's like a sort of a little visual reference to that in some way, because it's that thing of, you know, the middle American town, you know, the strange happenings going on, you know, and these teenage kids riding these slightly undersized bikes. And I thought, you know, this is possibly a little dig, because I read that Carpenter was a little bit annoyed when The Thing came out, that E.T. was coming out just after or same time, and it was kind of sucking up all of the attention in the movie world, you know. So his film was kind of relegated and didn't do it quite as well.
It's funny that it reminds you of E.T., because that kid on the bike reminded me of Anakin Skywalker in Episode 1.
Well, it is him, isn't it?
It is. It's Hayden Christensen.
Shall we get him up? I do have the screenshot, because obviously I have the screenshot. Where's my boy?
I hear he's still acting to this day as Darth Vader these days.
I really love that sequence. I mean, it reminded me a lot more of Lost Highway, but there is something there, and
I thought Lynch as well. Yeah,
it's a really powerful idea that just the bit where he's knocked down, he says he won't let me leave, is the most disturbing bit in the movie for me. Yeah,
but you're right. The Lynch reference there with the yellow lines in the darkness, you know, moving away and away. But I couldn't remember if Lost Highway was before or after this. I think it was after this. But it's a kind of,
let's check.
You know,
my favorite Marilyn Manson movie.
But
let's see, it was 97. But you can get the vibe. The vibe is there. I mean, there are night driving sequences in Blue Velvet.
Yeah, I mean, it's post Twin Peaks, let's say that, you know, because so you know that odd kind of small town weirdness is going to be referenced as well.
Oh yeah. All right, let's get back to the asylum, and we did have a cameo that I particularly appreciated. Can we call it a cameo? Maybe it's more of a small role. This beautiful chap here. It's only your boy David Warner, beloved to us from primarily The Omen, I would say, but also I think we probably have some Straw Dogs fans in here.
Yes, indeed. Gave a very notable Hamlet in the 60s, the student Hamlet, they called it, because I think he dressed with like a big sort of Doctor Who scarf and slouched around the stage looking kind of, you know, hipsterish.
Oh my goodness, I have not seen that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm planning on watching the McKellen King Lear this weekend, which I've meant to do for a few years. But I'm thinking this is a time.
I met Warner at the RSC years ago because he was there doing a show, and I had a friend working there, and he's a nice enough guy, but a bit mad.
I think that helps. That helps. I mean, he was still working like a couple of years ago. He was in Inside Number 9 in one of their episodes, which was quite amazing to see. Okay, and we have a cat cameo. Hello, Gatsby. Come Sie mal rein. He's going to do what he wants. Also, so we mentioned David Warner is in The Omen. It would be remiss of me not to mention Sam Neill's previous horror role as Satan himself, the Antichrist, in Omen 3, The Final Conflict. Filmed a couple of years before this, although obviously you think 90s Sam Neill, you're mostly thinking Jurassic Park and Event Horizon. Maybe Contact if you really like it. It wasn't in Contact. Cancel me. I'm wrong. I don't think it was.
There was something about it though. I felt that Sam Neill. It's almost like he was kind of wrong because he kind of seemed too nice, if you know what I mean. Like you say, he's kind of Jurassic Park kind of actor. He suits well in places where he has to be kind of a bit of a dad figure in some way.
Interesting.
He didn't seem to have the edge I would have necessarily expected in a.
I think he was brought in for this kind of like wink at the camera kind of cynicism. Like I feel he is the John Carpenter's cynicism. Do you get that, Haryan? Maybe.
Well, I mean, after I saw him in Event Horizon, I can see him in roles where he's not so nice. It was very cynical throughout this, and he kind of had to be, especially when he Like, spoilers, he learns that he's had no free will throughout the film.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, yeah, we are going to spoil the whole movie at this point, guys. So
yeah,
I always forget to say it.
yeah.
Sorry, just forgive me a second.
Because it's all right. I mean, people should know spoilers by this point. I mean, we've jumped around the whole film. I mean, we've spoiled the Hayden Christensen's in it, so people
That's all anyone.
That's the real spoiler. Yeah.
I think I can explain your take about him, seeming cynical. I mean, because I think, part of the first act of the film is this kind of framing with the Sam Neill character. When obviously we see him in the present moment being chucked into the asylum, and the David Warner character, Dr. Wren, he's kind of like, he's a doctor, yes, but he's kind of like a cop, if you know what I mean, as well. He's kind of questioning Trent and hinting that he realizes that Trent is possibly playing at being insane, because Trent covers himself and the whole cell with crosses, and Warner's character Wren says, well, they'd almost have to keep you in here by the fact that you've just kind of written in crayon over everything with crosses, and you sense that Trent kind of gets that he's on the level and knows that he's deliberately got himself incarcerated to protect himself from the evil forces from Cain and his demonic cohorts. But the idea of him being cynical, to me, it's kind of the hard bitten thing, because really I think a lot of the first scenes of the film, when you go back in time, establishing Trent's character as the clean-cut sort of insurance fraud investigator. Well, clearly it's a kind of allusion to the sort of Raymond Chandler Gumshoe kind of private detective of LA in the kind of 40s and 50s. The sort of hard-bitten, lives on his own, drinks whiskey, he sorts mysteries out, basically. And the first scene with him talking to the chap who's tried to pull the insurance fraud, he set his factory on fire. It's got like so many elements of kind of a Raymond Chandler novel. You've got kind of the suspect sweating and sort of pulling at his collar, and like the detective character kind of sort of skillfully pulling apart his story and showing how he's lied, and I think it's kind of framed in this sort of typical Gumshoe detective way. These are the pictures, we followed you around, and you've even got like the Latin femme fatale lover that you shouldn't tell your wife about, by the way, and you've got the blinds in the room, you've got the oppressive heat of the room, the nervousness. It's kind of all the tropes of film noir. So you're setting the I was
going to say, is your take that we're meant to feel like this is a little bit tropey, which feeds into later revelations?
I think it sets up and sort of slides the audience in a way that is recognizable. This is a kind of recognizable masculine American film framing. He's the hard-boiled Gumshoe. He's cynical. He doesn't believe in any of this stuff. And even Styles, the publishing PA, says to him later, it doesn't leave you very much to believe in at all if you don't believe in any stuff. So you're hinting there at the kind of the emptiness at the sort of the heart of this America that's kind of in profound doubt about itself. And I think the detective framing is kind of a sort of it's a kind of a slightly wink at the audience kind of way of setting the story up. He's going to come in and figure it all out and walk down these mean streets, and of course it all gets blown apart because he's incapable of mastering the situation.
It's sort of it's your classic competence display. Here's an easy challenge that he absolutely knocks out the park, so that when he's actually struggling later to solve something, that you get a feeling of tension that he's actually being challenged, even though the nature of the challenge is way beyond, say, something like Chinatown. But there's something deeper in that I find so interesting. I think of the 90s as quite a cynical time, a quite meta, a quite deconstructing time, and deconstruction postmodernism is very important to this film. But there's something so interesting that Carpenter, after making a kind of light version of this message in Prince of Darkness, has the ultra-rational, cynical guy, basically the spirit of the 90s, he has him proven wrong, and has rationalism defeated by something ancient and irrational and
Yes.
belief-based.
Exactly. And there's an interesting sort of, tension there as well, because, when you go back to that time, people at that point, at the sort of turn from the 80s to the 90s, I remember people were saying, oh, the 80s was so materialistic and coarse and greedy. But we're not going to be like that anymore. It's going to be the caring 90s. And that's literally the phrase that people use to kind of frame it. So you talking about people being kind of cynical in a way. I mean, that was true as well, I think. I think it was people telling themselves they were being caring while they were buying, organic fair trade coffee and, not sending money to companies that supported the arms trade and all the sort of stuff that became trendy at that time. And actually, they were kind of quite hollowed out as people as well. There was, like she says, there was nothing they believed in anymore.
Do you remember much Bill Hicks?
Oh, I love Bill Hicks. Yeah.
What you were saying just made me think of his bit, the whole, down with the system. I'm buying fair trade coffee. I'm going to boycott this. Is kind of like Bill Hicks' bit about, oh, you're off the marketing dollar. Oh, you're on the anti-marketing dollar. Very clever.
Exactly. Yeah. So there was this ironic subversion and twisting all the time, and that's classically associated with us kind of Gen X types as sort of being ironic, And Hicks doing his routine. If you work in marketing or advertising, kill yourself. That kind of level of cynicism. But I think that's definitely here. And as you said about deconstruction as well, there's a phenomenon where that hard-boiled gumshoe detective character is being pulled apart in those initial scenes. You've got things like he goes into the office with the Styles, the PA, and Jackson Harglow, the Charlton Heston character. And she kind of is needling him because he's coming in and saying, well, I can see this Sutter Kane thing's a bit of a phenomenon. The books are probably a bit trashy, but, it's a job, isn't it? And she sort of needles him and says, oh, you read books. And again, that's almost a direct lift from the Raymond Chandler novels, where he meets these sort of, the mystery women in whatever crime he's solving. And they always kind of have a dig at his intelligence, oh, you can read, can you? This kind of stuff. And then there's a kind of very hugely sort of, or you could say kind of Freudian thing where he's about to smoke and she immediately comes in with no smoking and takes the cigarette out of his mouth. And that's a kind of, that's seen as a kind of, very classic kind of emasculation trope, literally removing the man's penis, as it were. I mean, this is the thing that I don't know if you know about Edward Bernays. He exploited in marketing terms back in the 1920s, where he wanted a company wanted him to sell cigarettes to women, so he went to a psychoanalyst. This is in the Adam Curtis documentary, The Century of the Self. And the psychoanalyst told him, if you want to sell cigarettes to women, you have to create the vision in their mind of the cigarette. Essentially, it's the substitute penis. So it gives them empowerment, and that's how you sell them. Because we're not, at that point, they weren't selling many cigarettes to women. They want to capture the whole part of the market that was being neglected. So it's this thing of, immediately he's being undermined there. She's taking the cigarette out of his mouth, and it's also that sort of California culture of the time, that health obsessed kind of thing of we can't have you smoking, we can't have you doing anything crude and dirty and masculine here.
Well, you're not buying the cigarette, you're buying empowerment. And you're not buying a Sutter Kane book, you're buying a sense of a thrill, you're buying a feeling.
Yeah, she says it, doesn't she? She says, I just like to be scared.
Yeah.
When she reads books.
Which is kind of a dodge on the quality, which is quite interesting. I don't have much to say about Charlton Heston being here. He's ridiculously overqualified. It's kind of like Lauren Bacall in Misery. It's total overkill, but
it's weird, isn't it? It's weird casting. I mean, you've literally got the guy who plays Moses, and Ben-Hur in this kind of sort of corporate role, and then you've got all the women around him who are kind of almost identical, sort of spinsterish power dressing jackets, shoulder pads, and glasses specifically. It renders them kind of like I say, sort of spinsterish looking and sort of slightly embittered.
Yeah. Do you notice all the sort of assistants around him at the start were women? And I think they were trying to getting him as like that Chad patriarch vibe.
Yeah.
That I quite liked. Yeah. Oh, I'm a fan of that. I like the setup that our man here, John Trent, is still cynical going into this. He doesn't drop the cynicism. It cracks me up. And we have skipped over an amazing scene that I really want to get Haryan's take on, because I think this is pure John Carpenter at his absolute best. This wonderful scene in particular. Do you want to take us through this, Haryan, just in case people haven't done their homework? Although I really hope you did, guys, because this one's an absolute treat.
Yeah, I mean, just for context of the scene, this is I've forgotten the character's name. John Trent. Yeah.
And the guy's called Robbie, the black guy. He's the guy who runs the insurance company.
Yeah. With Robbie, yeah. So they're just out to lunch talking about this case for insurance, because he's a freelance insurance investigator. So, they're just talking there, talking about the case, obviously. And I love the framing, how in the background there's just pure chaos going on, basically, because this axe-wielding maniac's just slowly walking up to the window, staring at Trent the whole time. And, just, nicely lifts up the axe, breaks through the window, chaos ensues in the diner as well. I just leans down to him, his eyes split apart, and he's like, "Oh, do you read any? Is it called Shutter? What's it called?
Do you read Sutter Kane?
Do you read Sutter Kane?" And it's like,
I love that effect.
Yeah, and then the police come out of nowhere and shoot him 8 times. It's great.
I think there's interesting thing that happens when he does that, because I think the actor's voice actually was overdubbed for that, as it was with a few other people, because it kind of suggests they've been possessed in some way. I don't think that's that actual actor's voice that was used, but I noticed a few more times where, like, there's the little girl who says "You're my mommy" later on, and her voice has been overdubbed. I think it's this suggestion again of slippage of reality, that people are no longer in control of themselves.
Definitely.
And the cop in the alleyway, "Do you want somebody?" And I think he's overdubbed as well. I could be wrong, but I just get the feeling it was deliberately made to sound like their voice is coming from somewhere else.
I think it's overdubbed as well, but the thing with the eyes, I think, is great. Not just because it's a freaky effect that makes you go, "Hang on, what?" But the suggestion of double vision, of seeing different things, is really relevant to this theme of reality and fiction and their blurring and blending. Yeah. And
there's very interesting sort of prefiguring in the way the scene's set up as you watch it. Very sort of heavy visual codes of the color red. You notice the seats they're sitting on. There's a truck passing in the background that is bright red. There's the Coke umbrellas over the road. On the wall next to them, there's a big red car. I mean, when you look at a film frame, nothing is kind of left to chance. It's all kind of intentional. It's all kind of been specifically put there. This particular frame doesn't show the whole thing, but this sort of montage in this sequence, you notice little sort of flickers of red here and there passing in the background, or just the camera brushing against red. And of course, again, it's that sort of cueing you in for, okay, here we go to the violence. Here we go to the blood.
Yeah. Well, there's also the symmetry that they really build up. So, like, symmetry, it's most obvious in the benches because they're inclining inwards. And all of that is to sort of visually direct you towards the guy walking slowly up, which you don't really need much help to see. But it helps. It is in there, like...
And the idea of him coming through the window, again, that idea I talked about to begin with, about the author himself behind the screen, breaking through. And to some sense being trapped behind it, but then breaking through into reality, or what we think of as reality. I think there's definitely that deliberate thing of people being faces behind glass. You see it with Trent in the asylum. You see it with this guy. You see it at the end of the film with Trent himself observing himself through the screen of the cinema.
Yeah.
Save me from myself, guys, by the way.
That's okay. So this is a good bait. We have this memorable thing. It's got a big WTF factor. This happens actually before he goes into the office to get contracted on this job. And then there's a brilliant revelation from Styles that Well, actually, Harry, do you want to discuss that bit?
Which bit's this now?
So it's just how they lay out what the situation is with Sutter Kane, because I don't think we've actually discussed that. We should discuss quickly who he is and why they want to hire John Trent.
Well, essentially, they don't really know who he is. From what I can tell, it's just people will read his books, and some people, as we saw with the cafe scene, have a reaction to reading his books where they'll go psychotic, basically. And so obviously they're kind of just wanting to investigate why. Which
they're making a ton of money off him, and
yeah, but they don't want to be liable for.
Well, I think it's more like they don't care about it. Like, he's a money maker, and it's interesting. Like that in the era of the Moral Majority, which was a campaigning organization in America, equivalent to Britain's Viewers and Listeners Association, organized by Mary Whitehouse. You know, it's basically putting their argument on screen and saying, "Yep," but I think kind of making it almost parodic here. But the company's hiring them because Sutter Kane, their big cash cow, has gone missing. He has produced a bit of a manuscript for his upcoming masterpiece, In the Mouth of Madness. So the title of the manuscript is the same as the title of the movie. We are in deep meta territory here, and we will not leave. And so, I mean, the focus on the merchandising alone is hilarious enough. But they say that only a small bit of the manuscript was delivered to Kane's agent. Yeah. And then we get a really fun revelation about that.
Well, he was the guy who, was with the axe.
How did you feel about that, Haryan?
I was like, "Ooh, what a twist! This is a good hook. This got me involved. I want to know where this goes." You know, I did on touching on like seeing all the merchandise of Sutter Kane. I was wondering, because I saw in the background of one of the shots there are big bags with Sutter Kane written on them. I've never known anyone to like have that for J.K. Rowling or well, obviously they won't do that now, or Stephen King or anyone like that. I've never seen an author's name on a bag and someone proudly display that. It's usually the title of the books, like, you know, Harry Potter or whatever, or the franchise. So I found that odd. But I guess it's just
like the branding is intense. Like this isn't particularly novel, though. I should note. Now I can only say this about Agatha Christie because waifu is ridiculously into Agatha Christie. But that was she was basically a brand at the time. Similarly to Stephen King, they made sure that the Agatha Christie signature was on everything, just the way there is a Stephen King font. And interestingly, there's also a John Carpenter font that he uses for almost every movie. You also have a close-up of some of the artwork of his novels in case you were left wondering at all about the influence. So where is it? It is that one. So explicit Lovecraft influence here, and also just a bit gorgeous. I'm glad we got a close-up on this.
Just to Crow Minion in the chat, I was just looking at the comments. I used the word tentacular earlier. Yes, it is actually a real word. Yeah.
That's, also, in focusing on the posters, we get the first of many dream sequences. Well, maybe dream sequence, maybe not. That's kind of a thing in this.
Come to the end. I'll wait for the end to say what I think of that.
Okay. I mean, this is something the film does it a lot, so I'll just focus on this one example of it. But they really like building up a motif and bringing it back and messing with it, which screws with your sense of certainty. So in this case, Neill's just walking along. He sees a poster for Hobbs End Horror with a little tear in it. It's interesting, that tear. Like kind of like a breach in something through to something else. Very relevant.
Mm.
And then going on from that,
Alright.
he walks into a relevant bit of social commentary, which is maybe a bit too snarky, I shouldn't say. So he walks across a cop beating up a chap who was graffitiing. We think this is probably happening, I think.
This is, I think that screenshot you're using there is possibly the second time he comes across this, doesn't he? Because he comes across it the first time, and you notice that there are sort of, bums and hobos and vagrants standing around in the alleyway watching the cop beating the guy up, and they're all kind of looking very kind of detached and very stoned. And then he has this dream sequence where he's gone home with some of the Sutter Kane books, and he's on the sofa, he's kind of, fallen asleep, he's dreaming. He comes back to the alleyway. Now all the other people are gone.
Yeah, so this is that second sequence, definitely.
And you've got sort of in between this, the first time he comes to the alleyway and the second time he's been at home reading the books, and he's had the television on in the background, I think. And I think you hear, bits of dialogue off the television or the radio, or whatever it is. They're saying things like, it's mass hysteria, it's a pop phenomenon, it's a craze, it'll pass, things like that. One of the things I wrote down actually was you hear a newscaster saying, when does fiction become religion, and are his fans dangerous?
I meant to mention that earlier. I mean, this is pretty explicit that Sutter Kane is a new religion, that pop culture is a new religion. Like, it's maybe a point that's been done quite a bit, but it would maybe be remiss if they didn't do it.
Well, it's speaking to this kind of moment of emptiness, isn't it? Where, hyper consumerism really kicks into gear. Like we were just talking about branding, and although the Stephen King branding is very simple and very effective and easy to recognize, and it immediately triggers you to, buy the next book and buy the next book and buy the next book, because it feeds into that hunting instinct of collecting every single title. I mean, I remember, as I say, at the time, it would be kind of a black cover, Stephen King, big letters, title of the book in a kind of sort of red slash across the cover, and a very simple, creepy image, right? Really small, nothing huge, nothing elaborate. But it would kind of prompt you to go, okay, now you've got The Shining, now you've got to get the next one, now you've got to get the next one. And it
Lots
was this
of vignettes. Hang on, Murgoot's been an absolute star, and he's got a bunch of those images up, so I'm just going to get those on screen for you if I can.
But the interesting thing about this thing in the alleyway is, as I say, the first time he sees it, all the kind of, the tramps are standing around watching it in a very detached way. The next time he's alone, and then it sort of does a sharp cut to him being back at home, watching violence on the telly himself, watching the riots caused by the Sutter Kane phenomenon.
Quite an echo there. Yeah, that change to the passivity. I mean, I was going to say, I think this cop thing is basically a Rodney King thing. And there was something else I wanted to slip in here, because it gets more disturbing as he revisits the scene. Yeah. It changes subtly. And I'll just mention it. So there's a recurring motif of creepy children chasing a dog, which gets worse and more disturbing each time you see it. There is a painting which continually changes. I'm going to make this as large as I can so you can see it. This is the third time you see this scene. Look in the crowd, just slightly to the left of Trent, immediately to the right of the chap with the axe. That is not a human. Now, I didn't notice this, and I've seen this about 4 times. But that is what looks like a deep one. That hobo has a weird, deformed fish face that you'd expect of one of Lovecraft's deep ones. And Carpenter just stuck one in the crowd at the back. As Red Letter Media like to say, you didn't notice it, but your brain did. And once I caught that, I thought, I've got to point that out to you. And John Gorris is absolutely right. Yes, it's like hobos from Prince of Darkness. And since you've mentioned Prince of Darkness, we would be remiss if we did not notice that Carpenter shamelessly, and why should he not, reuses a scare from Prince of Darkness here, which is nevertheless very effective. I've got to ask Haryan, did this spook you?
I felt it was cheap.
Oh.
I felt it was one of those cheap horrors, and I'm like, oh,
it's
thanks
totally
for that. Yeah, I was like, oh, is this the type we're gonna have? I was hooked. Oh well, at least hopefully the story will be good with some cheap scares. But no, I was actually quite happy to kind of see that it tried to justify the rest of the scares rather than just be random dream and then jump scare.
Yeah,
So,
it's not The Conjuring at all.
No,
this is the man is losing his grip on the world through exposure, and as you've kind of got his dream world and the real world are influencing each other quite a lot in terms of this passivity in watching, in watching the violence. It's a good observation.
And then I mean, after the two dream sequences, I guess, I don't know if the two alley scenes, I guess we'll call them. Yeah. But he kind of just has an epiphany after that, doesn't he? And makes the works out the red lines, you stick them together, it makes a map. I was like, oh, that's pretty smart.
Yeah, I love that. I thought that was a really good one.
Yeah, and you kind of get why he notices it, because he's got all the books in front of him. Clearly, he's reading through them. And yeah, you notice the pattern. And yeah, there we go.
I'm going to try and be a bit too clever now and say that there was something about this. There was something about this that the whole thing of the rip in the image, the tear, and creating this sort of truth out of the pieces of the covers of the book. It's very much like there's a Frankfurt School historian called Walter Benjamin, who was kind of sort of coming into vogue for a lot of the sort of left in the 90s. And one of his famous sayings was, the fragment is the gateway to the whole. It's this kind of sort of post sort of Marx belief. You can sort of extrapolate the truth from the kind of fractals of evidence that are everywhere. You can kind of pull apart the little bits, put them together, rearrange them, and then discover the truth, the kind of portal back, in this case, the map to Hobbs End. And I think that becomes a sort of very strong cultural idea that you can sort of fragment everything and hold the little tiny bits up and say, this is my truth, and this is a part of the kind of my journey, And so this idea of, assembling it out of little bits of ephemera is very much a sort of pop culture trope of the kind of 90s onwards.
Well, you may not be very off there. I mean, I think they're very conscious about this. Maybe not Walter Benjamin
not that much. No.
But what Styles says is on their journey to Hobbs End after discovering this via the map. Styles says something that I tweeted out because to promote the stream because I just thought it was too good. She's saying to the arch rationalist and cynic and skeptic, he should have a fedora, frankly, John Trent. She says that the sane and the insane could easily switch places if the insane were to become the majority. Now, that's a constructionist view. That is literally, she say, reality is simply what the majority of people believe. We have seen this so much in our own time that what is, even in the dilute form of the Overton window, but obviously it goes far beyond the Everton window of what is just acceptable. Literally the things that will be granted as a given versus written off as a conspiracy, very much based on what is acceptable.
And Styles has a bit of an echo of that quote you gave there, where she says to Trent later on, what scares me about Kane's work is what might happen if reality shared his point of view.
Uh-oh.
Oh, no. They're a bit heavy-handed in that conversation, it must be said.
Somewhat.
Because, the foreshadowing of, I tweeted it out and I'm just going to read it directly. Sane and insane could easily switch places if the insane were to become the majority. you would find yourself in a padded cell, wondering what happened to the world. And he says, it never happened to me. Now, if we hadn't had that prologue, you know, I didn't know about that. I love the opening of this. And this is only a 95-minute movie. I wonder on some level if the prologue was padding, but it sort of, I think the line is a bit weakened by the foreshadowing, or
I don't know.
as Fight Club said, flashback humor. It does make it quite obvious.
I thought it was fine.
It's fine. I mean, I'm nitpicking here. It's something that's just a little too heavy-handed. But yes, they go on their way to Hobbs End, and this is what I thought was one of the strongest sequences. There are some great visuals of it just getting a little bit weird, getting a little freaky. There's this image of the kid on the bike in the darkness, just getting illuminated by the rear light, and I think it looks so creepy. I absolutely love it. And actually, do you want to describe what happens with the kid on the bike? Because I think it's a really powerful sequence.
Yeah, I mean, they're just driving through in the dark. Obviously, as you say, he's illuminated by the rear lights, and then not too long after this, the woman driving, by the way, so of course this happens. She sees another one coming towards her, and being a woman driver, obviously she can't drive properly, but she gets a bit freaked out because he looks about 80, even though he's clearly a kid on a bike. And so she carries on a bit again, and there's another one coming directly at her, and she's a woman driver, so she doesn't stop, doesn't swerve, anything like that. No, just drives right into him while screaming, which obviously then she has to stop and turn around and see what happens, and obviously it wakes up Trent as well, as we can see. And she goes over to the kid, and then we finally get a close-up of him, and it is just, I don't know, it's the height of a 12-year-old, and you can tell it's a 12-year-old in the prosthetic, but it just looks creepy old, a bit like the Doc from Back to the Future. I think it's the best way I can describe it, Christopher Lloyd. So he's on the floor in pain, then just gets up and rides off. It's like, what's going on? And she's just obviously freaked out. And Trent's like, what? Didn't you hit him? And then they're just like, let's carry on then. I was like, man, I'd be more freaked out than that if I were Trent, but I mean,
yeah,
he's cynical.
Her brain is very much fraying at this point already. You can see like just the idea of the impossibility of passing this kid twice, even though you haven't changed, and then he's older. But
and then
the thing he says of he won't let me leave is so damn creepy. When the kid is absolutely ancient, that's just like nightmarish. So I really loved that. Highly disturbing, would recommend. And then they are just going into this kind of weird dream logic, I guess it's kind of familiar, where you're just driving along, it's dark, you're losing attention, and then all the lights go out.
Yep.
Spooky stuff.
And then I don't know if this happens to you two, but you look out the side of the window and you're on the clouds all of a sudden. I mean, it's pretty standard for me.
I think the thing I took from the kid on the bike was also there's sort of a symbolic level element to it as well. That you obviously first see him as a young kid, literally young kid in his denim jacket, his jeans, heading in the direction that the car is going, and then as you say, he's coming back in the opposite direction now. From where he's obviously come from the town, as an old guy, but still in the same teenager's clothing. And I think this is something, again, it's this thing about this recursion to pop culture and keeping you in a kind of adolescent state, no matter how old you get. That
foreshadows Trent's inability to escape. But the idea that there is no escape from pop culture, or you could even say there is no escape from the narrative.
stops you growing up?
Yeah, it's in there. I think it's in there. I mean, the idea of a whole town that's basically at the mercy because it's all been planned has wider application, I think, in terms of the idea, the constructionist idea. We are all within a narrative of kinds, and the kid on the bicycle is just a really cruel, nightmarish embodiment of that. Of you cannot escape this. Keeping it just to pop culture, then it is in there.
And again, I think just cutting back a little earlier in the drive when it's during the daytime period at the beginning of the sequence. This is just another visual reference. You notice that they're driving specifically past rows and rows of cornfields, and I think, isn't this the time where Children of the Corn starts to become a massive franchise as well? That sort of.
I mean, Children of the Corn was 88. I'll do a quick check for you.
Yeah, and. I just thought that was a sort of specific kind of reminder of something. It's not that they're just driving past any random rural landscape. It was
84.
Right. So that's been in for a while. Because I remember Children of the Corn was a thing as well. I think didn't they make about 10 films or something?
Oh, that is a deep well that I have.
Yeah.
I can't go into that.
Yeah.
That is.
Yeah.
That's just too big a franchise for me.
Yeah.
It's a short story. How have they made 10 films?
Yeah. It's framed end to end, the sequence, with that, the bright daylight, the rural scenery. I think he's also at the beginning of the drive, he's singing like snatches of the national anthem. Because I know he says the line about from sea to shining sea. And then they come out at the other end in daytime into this kind of, sort of picture perfect, pretty rural town. He literally calls it Main Street, USA.
There's kind of a thing here that they're tapping into, that it's a lot stronger when they deal with the South, but I think there's a sort of bias of the people who make movies, that the city is your normal place, and there's just something a little creepy about small towns. There's a little weird. Like, they situate small towns as being slightly uncanny and horrific. And there's skepticism towards them. And I think something like the cornrows and them being lost in that, the feeling that you move away from civilization.
Well, yeah, I think it's because they tend to be more tight-knit communities with their own kind of subculture most of the time as well. And as an outsider, that's a lot more harder to get yourself into than, say, a big metropolitan city. So that might be why, because it's not just American small towns. I mean, one of the greatest horror comedies ever made, Hot Fuzz, is about that, basically.
Yeah. Well, there's probably more of a practical storytelling thing, that it's cheaper to film in a small town, and
but even in books, it's the case.
Yeah, well, you want people a bit isolated, basically. You want a small cast in a small location. It's just a lot easier to handle all the moving parts in that.
It's also very pointed, though, isn't it? There's this great contrast, because when they get into the town, you really notice, like, the car is kind of sort of dirty and blattered with water, and it's a sort of corporate grey, and it looks very strongly urban and out of place, in this sort of pretty kind of chocolate box sort of town, which apparently they filmed in Canada, which wasn't in America. It's a place called Unionville.
You also see 2 antique shops. Those are the 2 shops that are most identifiable. And you're like, two?
That's it. And he peers through the window and he says something like, "Oh, it's just rubbishy old antiques." So it's a kind of thing about, in the encounter with another real America, but it's kind of dismissed as kind of, old and dusty and dull, and we're the sort of, the cool urban people, and coming into this. And then, as you say, she gets out the car, Stiles, and she hallucinates these children, chasing a dog. It's like a big fluffy kind of dog, and it looks like a kind of sweet sort of thing in a way. It's odd because he doesn't see them, but you feel it's kind of, she's starting to get these intrusions of something. Maybe it's like childhood memories or something. It's kind of hinted at, or that it's it's a kind of sentimental thing. It turns a bit more sinister later on, obviously, but it's this thing that it just looks kind of innocent and kind of apple pie at that point.
I think it's already slightly disturbing from the off. I mean, maybe you can back me up on this, Harry. And I feel this element is the strongest Stephen Kingism in terms of was it the reference they make later to Mommy's Day feels so Stephen King to me. It's his style of building something up. He likes to take a quaint phrase, a kind of weird phrase, and then repeat it a lot and make it kind of weird. And he can do this with absolutely nothing. Like he'll do it with a brand of soup, and he'll start making that creepy by the end. It's like wait, Harry, lamp monster? Is that the Family Guy reference?
Lamp monster.
I thought I'd beat you to a Family Guy reference this week.
I'm trying to think of the lamp monster reference from Family Guy because I have seen every episode.
It's Stephen King in an office with his agent, and he's in there to sell the book, and he's like, and he's looking around desperately for information. There's a young married couple go on honeymoon, and they're attacked by a lamp monster, and he grabs the lamp.
Whoa, yeah.
Whoa,
Right, that's on the first episode, yeah.
Get me a draft in a week.
His agent's like, all right, right.
I agree with you.
I'm not saying I hate it. I'm just like, this is a Stephen King thing, and it's being done very, very well.
Yeah, I mean, it's when they get to it's as soon as they get to the town, really, and when they get to the church as well. The church bit I just found weird. I was like, oh, this is a film where things are just going to happen then, because it's we're getting. Well, they get to the church and they have a bit of a look around the church and like, not really sure what's going on here, but it's in the book, so see what it can do. Doors are locked and all that, and then they see about 4 pickup trucks just hurtling their way. Well, 1 pickup truck, 3 other cars, all hurtling their way toward it, and then a load of men come out with shotguns, like shouting for Crane to come out, and then there's just a child in the door that's just opening and shutting until finally you see Crane, and then 3 dogs come out of nowhere, and I'm like, what is going on?
The thing that actually caught me off guard and freaked me out slightly was the guy who comes out of the car with a shotgun is bloody Vigo the Carpathian from Ghostbusters 2.
I haven't seen Ghostbusters 2.
Oh no, right, okay, yeah.
I remember Red Letter Media were quite fascinated with that.
Yeah. He's a German actor, apparently. He's dead now. Can't remember his name, but anyway, that was kind of weird. Yeah. I was going to say that the thing about the children, though, is it kind of seems like it maybe is very unsubtle, but it's only her who seems to see them, and they kind of talk to her, and you very much feel okay. So it's kind of making the point that as you have this idea of the kind of the rip, if you like, the tear in the sort of, I don't know, space-time continuum or whatever, and things kind of protrude through. And she, obviously, you read her as a kind of corporate woman, don't you? She's probably single, and it's like, it's something about, she's being reminded about children, the importance of, etc.
Being sort of haunted by that. Yeah. I mean, the children being twisted is also very echoing the moral majority argument again, which is the children will be corrupted first by it. I've got a better screen cap. I should point out this is an actual church, which is kind of amazing. And you want to talk about it's a church taken over by a black church, and you have the black and the white symbolism on here. But then look at the outfits of Trent and woman character. I never remember anyone's name. Styles. There we go.
Yeah, and again, it's very on the nose there. She's kind of in a sort of virginal white kind of, or slightly off-white kind of thing here, but that becomes relevant later as well.
It's your Mulder and Scully classic. It's like, let's do the clash with the colours, but I don't care. I know it's well done. I know it's been done many times. I'm eating it up. Put it on my plate. Give me a second helping. I like a bold aesthetic. I will happily be spoon-fed that kind of thing because it tells me that the director has thought about it. I'll also get up the creepy kids quickly, and then I do want to... Oh, gosh, where are they? Right one. I have got a lot of screen caps for this because there were so many things I wanted to remember. I've got a quick glimpse of Sutter Kane. Actually, I'll leave it on that. And if I can just quickly, I just want to say thank you to Bolero393. Thank you very much. Appreciate you being on here. Appreciate the $10. That is fantastic. If you missed the beginning of the stream, it's okay. You can watch it on the replay. There are 35 minutes of BBFC history where I basically vindicate the culture is downstream from law hypothesis that maybe I can clip and send to a certain Italian author, Sheila Lambrini, I think. I don't know. But thank you so much. I'm really glad you like the Black Mirror video. I'm really chuffed with it, and I do keep the martini aesthetic. The trouble is, I do film those all in the morning, and so anytime you see me with a cocktail in a video, it is fake. I'm usually using a fairly dilute tea to stand in for whiskey, so I'm sorry to spoil the illusion, but I'm glad you like it.
It's all showbiz, folks.
It's all showbiz. I also didn't actually melt through a wall that one time. All right, thanks again for $10. Much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Ever get the feeling you're being cheated?
Oh, tricks of the trade. Yeah. Yeah, there's our creepy Sutter Kane. I love it. Jürgen Bocknau, looking absolutely amazing.
He's brilliant.
He's such a good guy. I think there were... Oh, we're getting Fs in the chat. What's the F? Oh no, guys. What's the F? Have we gone down?
No, we're still going.
Okay.
Sounds like it. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Hopefully Jürgen Bocknau is still alive, and it's not Fs for him.
Oh God, no! I hope not. Yeah, I absolutely love this guy. Brilliant in Das Boot, of course, and also in a little-known version of Robin Hood that was that came out at the same time as the Kevin Costner film. For those who were interested, we all remember the Kevin Costner one. Yes, I didn't like it. There was a much better version with Patrick Bergin playing Robin Hood, and Jürgen Prochnow played Baron de Guerre, and it's a really good film. It's much better than the Kevin Costner one. Go and watch it.
I appreciate the tip. I was researching for a topic on German horror, but okay, Fs were for the fake martinis, and we had little latencies. So that's okay. Worried about that. Okay, I'll tell you what. I'll do a stream and I'll drink a few martinis. How about that? I'll balance it out. Yeah, the German film industry just got nuked by all the issues they had post-war. Unfortunately. I mean, they got out some beauties, but it was just very set back, and sad to say. So you get some nice dramas from like Margarete von Trotter, but German horror not widely done, unfortunately. So yes, very enigmatic, this guy. And I'll just get up our creepy kids again because I really like the. It's very on the nose. It's very Stephen King. And it's very buried deep in the tabs I've got here. Here we go.
Someone in the chat saying the best Robin Hood was the ITV series with the Clannad theme tune. You're probably right.
I don't know that one. Are we just skipping past Maid Marian and her merry men? Danny John Jules.
That's Page Unknown in the chat. Was your favourite Robin Hood Michael Praed or Jason Connery? Let us know.
Yoga Butgereit? Doesn't. Oh, Don got there as well. Very formative. Maid Marian, very formative on many a Brit. Yeah, this bit here, I said I wouldn't do it, but I just find it a bit irresistible because I've got the screen cap. This is, as I said, the motif of repeating the thing, twisting it a bit, making it work, intensifying. They've done it with a few things in the film that we mentioned. This is with the kids. This is your payoff to them chasing the dog. They've caught the dog. I am not going to screen cap it for you, but that dog later limps off with a leg missing. Horrific stuff.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, how did you feel about that? I found I can't watch stuff done to animals, so.
I was more creeped out by going spider mode. I can't remember her name, and she's a woman, so I don't care. Styles, yeah. Yeah, and then obviously he rams through the whole crowd as well. That's all fun and games. But with the dog though, and I mean, you know me, I really like my plot, and at this point, I was kind of just, I'll enjoy the spectacle, because this plot seems to have a really good idea, and I'm not exactly sure what they're trying to execute. And unfortunately, you don't. It's about an hour and 10 minutes in where that's kind of revealed. Because a lot of this is just spectacle, basically, from the church bit. It kind of just speeds up very, very quickly, and you've got the old guy handcuffed to the old woman's ankle.
I do have that. If you don't mind some eye bleach afterwards. I thought that was quite wonderful as a visual, just in terms of making me really regret things.
I mean,
do you want to explain this quickly? Seeing as I'm putting it up on screen, maybe magnifying it for people.
I mean, from what I could gather, they mentioned basically in one of Cain's books, it's about a woman who abuses her husband this way and then ends up murdering him. And I think I think that's just the story, because the idea of what's it called, Hobbs End, it is that it's kind of like a fairy tale town, but purely of Cain's books, which kind of explains why things are just happening. It kind of turns into a mishmash of his books, which I was all right with. As that's kind of revealed about, I don't know, an hour in, and then everything hits the fan until Trent finally meets him. It's just, my main gripe with this film is getting my head around kind of what's real. And it's about this point I may as well just say I don't think anything's real. It's all just his book, which kind of breaks the film, I think.
I think you're right to feel that. I think disorientation is deliberate.
Yeah, which it certainly works, and I get that's what they were going for. But then when it comes down to kind of how I rate this, because I'm thinking that far ahead, technically, because it's all supposed to be a story of this guy who's writing the books, technically it's a 12, because there's nothing objectively wrong, because it's the whole narrative is basically a meta-narrative about this guy writing the book, and this is the book that's being put to film, and then it turns out to be a film. It's like,
so Haryan, did you, when you're saying it's all spectacle, and I agree, is that kind of a thing of, do you think we teetered on stuff just happens?
Stuff just happens, but it's explained. This is what I mean. In a meta way, it's explained why stuff just happens, because it turns out Sutter Crane is the type of person that writes bad plots.
Yeah.
Just writes spectacle.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think I go with that, because I think there's just like a slight angle on that is, you know, that scene where he meets Vigo the Carpathian, Johnny Boys, Dad. I love the way he said it. I'm also obsessed with that line reading. And the guy basically doesn't respond to anything Trent says. He just gives kind of stock dialogue. Yeah,
he's literally an NPC.
Yeah. NPC is exactly it. It's like the whole town is an NPC, and John Trent tries to interact with it, but stuff just kind of happens because it's been pre-written.
Yeah.
And so you get these jarring things where it doesn't really respond to him. Like we'll have to. There's a big question over this, over whether John Trent is real, and is John Trent real and was brought into the fictional world, or is John Trent fictional and was sent into the real world? And that's something I have not made my mind up on. I like to think that he starts in the fictional world, and it's all about him moving out into the real world. Because there's the line that David Warner says at the start about asking the Dr. Chilton-esque doctor. He asks him, is he one of them? And when he says them, it could just be like one of these crazy guys going banana, or I kind of think is he one of these fictional characters who's crossed over, like the monsters? That's how I read the line.
I mean, I've just got a whole different outlook. As I say, I don't think anything in the film's actually real or supposed to represent the real world. I think it's just supposed to completely represent what this guy's written, rather than make its own kind of functioning internal world.
Okay.
Cohesive world. So with Trent, I just don't think he's real, because I think the only person who's real in this story is Kane, because he's self-inserted himself.
That's fair enough. He does say in this scene, I found out you can edit it from inside.
Yeah.
Which would support your theory.
I think there's lots of playing with slippage of reality, kind of various realities poking through the rip and sort of eating into each other, and then exploding, and then a new one popping up from the ashes, and people sort of wondering, is this the dream sequence, or is this me dreaming the dream sequence, or is it about to cut back to reality? And your Vigo character in the bar there, you've got the thing where later on Trent's, he's about to sort of, not a spoiler really, he's about to blow his own head off, and Trent's, he's almost about to say, don't kill yourself, and he says back to him, I have to, he wrote me this way. And you get an echo of kind of like Jessica Rabbit in who in Roger Rabbit,
this way.
I'm not bad, I'm just drawn this way. It's kind of like Tom Stoppard, characters who are sort of they're trapped in whatever the author's given them with their very limited possibilities, and the whole feeling induces a kind of melancholia in these characters that you see played out. They feel depressed at being trapped. And that melancholia is kind of itself a kind of throwback to sort of classic Gothic horror condition, that you find in like Edgar Allan Poe novels. People who they slump into these terrible depressions, and end up, all sorts of awful things end up happening to them. But he also says that character, the Vigo, the Carpathian cat. I've got to learn the character's name. He says, reality is not what it used to be. And again, that echoes kind of like, for me, it echoes the line from Cronenberg, Videodrome. Reality is less than television. Television is reality, and reality is less than television.
We had a lot of fun with Videodrome when we covered it. Yeah, indeed. It's kind of a thing like so many horror stories have enjoyed someone's horrible fate. Think of the Cask of Amontillado. Yeah. I mangled that. Or The Raven, classic. People are tied into a horrible fate.
People who fall into a despair, that kind of thing.
Yeah, we get this weird 90s thing where it's much more Pomo, it's much more fourth wall breaking, and your fate is literally written out because you're a character in a story. Now, this has happened a lot. Like, I would call back to classic Doctor Who and The Mind Robber, and Patrick Troughton as the second Doctor. A lot of these stories, they have fun with a bit of, we're in a story. And they always have to get hold of the script, and see what's about to happen. But at that point, you do reach a bit of a sort of story dead end, as this film kind of does as well. But luckily, I think it sees that story dead end and veers off.
Well, and part of that's the time it's set in as well. That Haryan's talking about this sense of being disorientated and confused by it, and it's at the time of this proliferation of new media, where what I was saying before about the Stephen King phenomenon came up with the private experience of reading a book, and the images go straight from the words on the page right into your cerebral cortex, into the imagination. And of course at this time it's reality being mediated at one or two removes. It's reality being regenerated through the screen, and then later obviously with the internet you get this sort of the anxiety about the way that begins to sort of feed back, if you like, culturally into people's mood.
Existenz from Cronenberg looked at that. Yeah, it's confusing. Oof. But oh man, to veer off from that, I love this scene. I love how it looks. You know, we also get the black-white pairing again, but also the backdrop of this is quite amazing.
And do you know how we missed out earlier though? When they rock up at the creepy hotel with Mrs. Pickman.
Yes.
And as you mentioned, there's the picture on the wall, the painting on the wall, with the figures in it. And I don't know if you notice in the painting on the wall, there's a man and a woman, and I think later we begin to suspect the man is Sutter Kane, who is himself in the picture dressed in white, while the woman, who we think is a reflection of Styles, is dressed in black. Make of that what you will.
Oh, I hadn't picked up on that as much.
Yep.
I think that there's deep stuff. It's like the church also suddenly appears in it, and it's a thing they have a great amount of fun with. I really like it. Kane basically. I don't know how to describe how he interacts with Styles here. Like, it gets sexual, and then you see the horrific sort of Janus-like creation. Dom, I think Pickman is a reference to another story. There's a lot of them buried in there. I can't remember what it was. I'm afraid I'm too deep in the stream. That's basically a trust me, bro comment, but. I do remember Pickman was specifically a reference. He has a sort of Janus-like demon on his back, which is really interesting. And again, it's that duality that they bring up of reality and fiction, but they're kind of one and they switch over. I very much like that. But it's basically all heading to... I skip over a huge amount at this point because... It's kind of inevitable that John Trent is going to end up here. And we get quite a prolonged sequence where he goes around and sees weird things that...
It's the whole, big spectacle. I mean, what's the substance? The substance is, I wrote you into all this stuff. Oh.
it communicates his helplessness. His lack of agency very well in a sort of disturbing way. I like him trying to rescue Styles, but Styles is just gone at this point, and that sort of futility of that relationship is nicely unsettling.
Exactly, and there's a kind of killer line I think that she comes out with that kind of explains why he's kind of being so sort of deracinated, disempowered, torn out. She says it's the new book. It's about people turning into things. Yeah. I mean, and at this time, it feels very much like you're talking about, it's people turning into kind of consumers, turning into kind of fungibles,
economic units, products, get a digital ID. Become part of a system. Yeah, absolutely. And, the idea that you cannot escape from that is much easier to grasp than being unable to escape from a narrative.
Yeah, and she I think she says it as well later on. She comes back to the hotel room and she says, "I'm losing me," right? Again, the sense of the process of engaging with this culture. It does kind of end up being disorientating because it does kind of exclude you in the end. It does, it ties into this thing of mental illness. I mean, when she said that line, it's there's a line in a really old horror film called The Snake Pit from the 40s. And this woman, Olivia de Havilland, she's this character who basically, it's a kind of one of the early films about mental breakdown. And she has this famous line. She says, "When am I real?" And I thought it was kind of an echo of that.
Oh, nice. I wish I'd known about that earlier. We're doing psychological horror next month. And I was seething a tiny bit over how modern everything is. Oh, nice. I mean, Styles does get really quite interesting in this film. Like the idea of I'm not me and I'm changed by fiction. I I think that's quite deep. I mean, it really just does tie in with the rest of the narrative, but Trent and Stiles are really good examples of basically losing agency because of the overarching logic of the world they live in, which I think is like hugely relevant to us. You wonder the extent to which we're quite constructed. If we believe what we believe because we've been made to believe it. I mean, that can come out like a sort of 2005 edgy atheist take, or a kind of
I'm 14 and this is deep,
yeah. But at a very real level, we've seen how a mass media can sort of turn people on a dime into taking quite extreme actions. I will avoid explicit examples, but I'm sure we can think of many.
Yeah, if it's talking about this moment of American breakdown, I call it, and doubt. Kane has these lines which should reveal this. He says, religion seeks discipline through fear, and of course that does come across very much as an atheist fanboy line. And then he goes on to say, no one has ever believed it enough to make it real. The same cannot be said of my work. It's the old thing of if you don't believe in God, you believe in anything.
Yeah, it's so interesting because Carpenter is an atheist, and you think he'd be a bit of an edgy boy, and certainly he's had sort of dark spots in his career. Like I did a larger video on pro and anti-abortion messaging in horror films, and it sort of broke my heart a bit to feature John Carpenter's short episode of Masters of Horror Pro-Life as basically the worst example of pro-choice messaging. Absolutely terrible. But Carpenter in a couple of films has shown that he may be an atheist, but he does very much see the power of believing. And he doesn't want you to be nihilistic. Both, I think,
exactly.
Darkness and this show that belief is important, it is powerful, and being an edgy boy skeptic, it's not going to cut the mustard.
And at the same time, I think he also sees that he's also very suspicious of the hyper commercial nature of America as it's coming into being at that point. I think that's the thing. He may be an atheist himself, but he as you say, he's aware of that void that needs to be filled, and the danger is that it can be filled with crap.
Yeah,
sorry, I was not handy there.
No, I was just going to say it's a Nietzschean take, really. All right, we've killed God. Now what? You're not going to like what comes next. So that's what I was going to add. But I mean, you know me, I like to focus on plot, and the plot's very threadbare because I went through it in a meta sense. This whole plot is just Kane has written things. That's
it's 71 minutes. Actually, no, I don't think it's even 71 minutes into the movie. I might have a quick check.
It's not. It's just under 70 minutes in.
Okay, so that, I mean, this is interesting. This is like your big reveal and your big explanation, and there's 20 more minutes to go after this, which is quite weird.
Yeah, I mean, essentially this scene is what turned me back onto the film, and then I really, really like the rest of it. Because in his explanation, it's this is my world now. You're just living in it. I'm editing it as you go along. I hope you can understand that. And I mean, you were going on about themes before, but I think one of the biggest themes of this film is about free will. And when you've completely lost it, what do you do then? You live under the illusion you still have it, but as what happened with Trent, I mean, skipping ahead a bit, but he axes that guy and then goes into a mental hospital, and he's like, oh, there's no free will. I've worked it out now. I'm watching myself on the film. After the world's been destroyed.
I think that's the danger that Carpenter is interested in. I think that's the point that he breaks in with this film. There's a bit where Kane, he just kind of is in a rapture, and he says, I think it's to Trent, he says, just believe. And it's kind of there's there's a famous saying by Pascal. You know, Pascal of the famous wager. You've heard of Pascal's wager, obviously. I presume. And Pascal had this saying. Pascal had this saying, "Kneel and you will believe." You know, i.e., he's saying, you know, once you kind of you participate in the physics of culture, you kind of inevitably embrace its ideology. You know, and that's again feeding back to what I thought the theme of this film was. You kind of you end up being imprisoned by your investment in the culture, even if the culture is, you know, pop horror. And what does that say to you? What does that do to you? There's the things about what you say about the plot, I think, are absolutely true. It's kind of threadbare, and it's kind of tropic. It's bringing out all these kind of almost cliches of the horror genre and sort of throwing them together in a pot, in a kind of melange that doesn't sort of hang together. But that's...
I'd love to know how... I'm sorry to interrupt. I'd love to know how Pascal got to that. I'm totally with him. I'm wondering how he got to that understanding that if you participate, you will believe, in a kind of fake it till you make it thing, or a sort of just recognizing that as humans we are molded by what we do. I'm very interested in how he came to that conclusion.
I get the feeling it was intuition from him, because obviously with Pascal's wager, it's, oh, well, I may as well believe in God, because either I believe in him and go to heaven, or I don't believe in him and I might be wrong and go to hell. So he's kind of the agnostic Christian. Yeah. So I basically think he's saying, I don't really believe this, but if I'm acting like I do, then I basically believe it. It's quite Petersonian when you think about it, because he says, you know, as long as you act like you believe in God, that's kind of good enough. And that's basically, I think, what Pascal was like.
I think there's a level at which, like, you don't have conscious control of it. Like, if you do it, you will eventually believe it genuinely. And that's what the unconscious level.
Yeah, and that's what culture is doing. It's nudging you to make that first act, and once you do that, you're sold. You know, and Kane actually says, he goes on, he says, you know, the more people who believe, the faster the journey. You know, get on board. We're all going for capitalism, you know, or whatever, you know, Carpenter's digging at here.
Also, I'm afraid, Simon, you did start us on this train, so we're going to have to do it. This scene where you've got all of them together. We do have a character in black, a character in white, and the middleman character is in grey. Oh,
the framing.
There you
the
are.
Symbolism.
You can't help it. You start pointing out colours, and you just...
Yeah.
Actually, I'm not sneering at it. Rob Agar has an amazing analysis on the watch story in Pulp Fiction and how central colour is to that. Really interesting analysis, about 20 minutes, very worth your time. This does lead us up to... Oh, also this bit here. The thing he's walking to is the door that basically... The ancient door behind which the most ancient, dangerous creatures are. And the door is like basically barely holding them back. And you could have a 3-hour stream about that symbolism.
Again, the door was kind of sort of pulsing and sort of suppurating, wasn't it? Again, it reminded me of the TV and Videodrome.
Yeah.
You know, the things trying to break through.
Oh, definitely. It's like it should not behave. This scene is full of structures that do not behave the way that you think they should behave. I do love it. But yeah, this idea of... I just read this as ancient impulses. You already used the magical phrase monsters from the id that you cannot hold back. Like, I like this as a kind of rebuke to sophistication, that you can try and build up your big, rational, clever, big brain society, your urban metropolis shining towards the heavens. But realistically, there is some darker forces, older forces deep within you, and they have not gone away. You can try and suppress them, but they will break out.
Yeah. And I think I want to say, I mean, I know a lot of people express skepticism about Freud, and I'm not saying this is kind of me endorsing the idea of, you know, the monsters from the id. That's the kind of phraseology that comes from him. But what I'm talking about is where this film is in its time. That time in the sort of early to mid 90s is that period where, you know, America's getting onto Prozac, America's trying to deal with its monsters from the id, and everything kind of in their terms is framed through psychoanalysis, and that comes from Freud. And so, this sort of critique of culture is through the lens of the way culture has become sort of a therapeutic instance for people, and this stuff of horror. Pop horror is a kind of, in its way, a kind of containment mechanism for lots of these problems, because in the mind of, I guess, let's say the powers that be, elites, whatever, the idea of culture that contains thoughts and feelings about strong, visceral, primal, atavistic feelings about violence and about sexuality, and like, the Cthulhu kind of tentacle monster kind of, fits a lot of that, threat and kind of perversity. Are all kind of tied together in that mind. And of course, the horror genre, Stephen King as a proponent of that, is a great containment mechanism. He traps a lot of people with their heads down in his books while they're not noticing everything else that's going on.
Ooh.
Sorry.
No.
Just saying.
This is why you were invited on. Oh, delicious. Oh, good stuff. I really feel like I should caption this "Which Way Western Man," but I missed a trick there.
I think it's deliberate. I don't think it's anything by chance in that sense in what Carpenter's doing in this film. I think he's definitely it's kind of a morality tale, isn't it? It's kind of almost like a medieval morality tale.
Can I have a reach?
Yeah,
you had a reach.
Is there a gay reading? Like, what is it?
Just because there's a large wet tunnel that a man wants to get inside, Haryan, does not mean that there is a gay reading. Honestly, get your mind out the gutter. No, I was going to say this tunnel here, looking at the structure, look at the top of it. Note it as fluid. Is that or is that not a spine?
Oh, I thought it was more like a train carriage.
Oh,
like on a subway.
I just read it as a spine. Like the red is kind of this deep, passionate, like vein structure, like a heart, right?
Yeah.
And the alternative is this colder spine-like thing that struck me as like on the way to the brain. So it's like heart or brain.
I have to say, it looks, it's penile to me at the moment. We're looking at the design and the way that, in the scene, he's chased down it and he's kind of, I'm going to get very purple prose here, he's kind of ejaculated out back into the real world, isn't he?
It is very interesting how he doesn't escape. He he fails to escape the town deliberately, and then he fails to die because he's not allowed to die. He does fall down. We have an amazing sequence before this where Sutter Kane just pulls his face apart and tears an opening in reality, which is quite incredible. I love this.
Yeah, I mean, I took that as he's tearing open his imagination, and that's where the horrible monsters come out.
But you're also seeing it reveals a sort of reveals a script there.
He literally calls it the rip, doesn't he? It's the rip in space time. It's the rip in the story.
I love everything, and this is the point at which Styles literally starts reading the manuscript describing what Trent is doing, and thankfully they move off this because, as I've mentioned, this is kind of a story dead end. You can have fun with the meta of it. Spaceballs had a gay old time doing this, but ultimately you can't do much with it. There is a terrible episode of a horror anthology series called Urban Gothic, which thought it was being incredibly smart by having an episode where a bunch of teenagers are in a school being picked off by a killer, and they discover a script of the episode, and they decide, okay, well, we got to go off script, and then one of them just decides to walk out and leave the set, and is struck by lightning, and it's just, I'm sure you thought this was very clever, but when you just tell people it's all arbitrary, you kind of don't have any stakes.
Well, sorry to go very modern with my reference here, but it reminded me of what's it called, of Loki in the Marvel universe, where they basically found out in that series that free will doesn't exist.
Oh, get
it's
melted.
all scripted. Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, you get melted. Like, I don't know, John Wick's dog had to die, otherwise it would have been melted. Yeah,
Yes.
and the same thing has happened here. And I think what's it called? Trent reacts very humanly to this when he finds this all out, and especially when he goes back and finds details that he's passing on. No one believes him, and it's like, well, this can't happen. And it's like, oh,
Yeah.
why though? And then and then he works out, oh, well, the film's coming out of the adaptation to this, which is a very quick turnaround, because isn't The Mouth of Madness the new one?
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, I've been on this adventure for 2 days. Oh, there's a film out already. Oh, the book's not even out though. What?
Yeah.
But
everything kind of slips down the wormhole, though, doesn't it? With time as well. But you're right. I mean, because Kane says, you are what I write, but then Trent sort of shoots back with, I think, therefore you are.
Yeah. I mean, as I say, it's all explained through this in a meta sense. It's all written by Kane, whoever this Kane person is, because he might not even look like how he looks in this self-insert. Because from what I took from this and from the film, basically Trent has watched this film, and he'd even see himself laughing at the end, and going mad. So, it's hard to put into words, really.
It is a very hard film to convey. I've sort of stinged you all here. I've got this screen cap when ultimately, again, our protagonist does not have the choice over what to do, which is quite a weird thing to do to your protagonist. He is made to do stuff, and when he refuses to do it, it happens anyway. The rift is open, and the dark monsters, the deep ones, come through. These are very Lovecraftian creatures. They chase him down the tunnel. He has to run. Styles leaves him behind. We get glimpses of these creatures, and they are amazingly eldritch and deformed. They're amazing. I'm not going to show you any of them, because even though I can draw individual frames out of the film, the intention, I think, is to glimpse them and not be sure of what you saw. And I want to stick to that spirit. You get weird, disturbing glimpses, and I think that's all we should have. So something here where we focus on John running away with a horde of deformed, unimaginable entities chasing him. I think that's the image I want to give you, basically. But they did look amazing, and I felt kind of bad that what's the team? It's Nicotero, Berger, and Kaufman. Those guys, we've done a lot of their films recently. Absolute legendary group of special effects artists. They did these physical effects for the ancient creatures. Do they even get 20 seconds on screen?
They get exactly as much time as I think they needed. Yes. It's not even that though. Yeah, it's one of those things where the less was definitely more for the scene, I'd say.
It just breaks my heart that there's so much detail on them, and you see that mass crowd of them for about a second, if that. But yes, what can I say? Less is indeed more. It would look a bit silly maybe if you drew in on them. But yes, he falls down and he isn't even allowed to die. And he wakes up outside. Again, it's so weird how the film make its protagonist so effectively useless.
I mean, that's very Lovecraftian, isn't it? It's the whole you have absolutely no chance against the horrors from other dimensions, essentially. So
yeah, you will not affect events. You will simply get to report them.
Yeah, exactly. And that's essentially what's happened here. And obviously, it starts making him go mad because Yeah, obviously he just comes here. We've talked about this little bike scene with little Annie. I did
Little
one
Annie.
thing.
Oh my, how you've
Little
grown!
Oh no! Oh, don't! He's not even 18 yet.
Stop, Padme.
Yeah, I have to say, what I really enjoyed about this sequence is that they could have just gone, oh, and somehow he made it back, and then they skip to the end of the film. But they actually put time and effort into saying how he got back. So he walked to that motel, or sorry, he hitchhiked to that motel, and then obviously got that bus back, and then it added to the story as well, because he starts burning the book, doesn't he? Because he's like, he's rejecting the fact he wants his free will so bad, he doesn't want to believe anything he's just gone through. But he can't escape it. He's looks into the abyss, and now he's on the bus home, and he's got the old woman speaking to him. Which, to be fair, that would make me scream as well. So I don't blame him. But
I think that journey back's important though, because we were saying about the monsters and not seeing them in detail, and you kind of, for me, as I say, the film sort of introduces and disposes of a lot of tropes very quickly. And again, you're not really meant to focus on the particularity of the monster or what it's going to do to you, or you're focusing on what's happening to you as invested, in this character, John Trent. He is he's the avatar of Joe Ordinary, going through this process of transformation and madness. And the journey back's interesting, like you say. There's the kind of all scenes that you may have seen or seen echoed in American films, sort of a long coach journey across the sort of Midwest, or when he gets to the motel, again, that's got echoes of like the young man at the desk is kind of just only slightly reminiscent of Anthony Perkins in Psycho, and literally in the room he's watching like a schlocky 50s horror film, of course. And the room itself looks sort of vaguely sinister, and it's all kind of, adjusting you back to reality, but you're seeing things through these horror tropes, but now they're kind of lifeless, they're kind of just part of the fabric of the everyday, passing back to the normal world, or quote normal world, and where you get him back to, the normal world has gone mad, it's gone crazy at this point, and yet he is obviously being framed as the crazy guy. He's psychotic and he doubts reality so much he feels able to start killing everybody else who's been infected, and it's kind of like his ideological possession is complete in a way through the process of the book, or the books that he's been reading, and the books that everybody else is just consuming.
Yeah, that what is it the chap here says to him? I can see. And he's like, oh, well, you won't be surprised. It's kind of like a sharing of a logic. Like, well, if you see things the way I see, then you won't mind this axe.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a great little kill. It's a lovely payoff. And then we end up back where we started. We're just I quite liked your interpretation, Simon, that he is putting it on a little bit, even then. But I think I wouldn't say he becomes true believer, but he becomes kind of resigned at this point at which he has his first night in the asylum. It goes super cray-cray. Everything is killed.
Well, yeah, there's massive claw marks and blood everywhere. Yeah. He doesn't even care. He just goes straight to the cinema.
It's just undeniable at this point. He finds himself like his buddy Charlton Heston in the Omega Man. He's the last one left.
Yeah, and it's interesting that when he goes back to see Charlton Heston, the Jackson Harglow character, that he finds that reality's already been rewritten. Because Harglow kind of says to him, "Oh yes, this woman Styles who was with you that you say you met," and you feel that the carpet's being pulled out from under his feet again, and Harglow says, "Oh yeah, don't worry about the script. We got it back from you months ago. Don't you remember?" And again, it's another classic sort of. It's like there was lots of there was a 50s, one of the 50s sci-fi films. It's like where there's the teenage kid who can see that everybody's an alien, but nobody believes him. It's that kind of denial of the truth of what you think you're seeing. And you've got the scene, he goes back to town and he finds the poster in the alleyway, and he rips it off, and he sees underneath a face, And I mean, you learn eventually, of course, it's the face. It's meant to be him in the movie poster you see there on the left of the screen. But when I looked at that face, actually, I couldn't tell, was it meant to be him or was it meant to be Sutter Kane? And I also looked at the face as well, and I thought it also reminds me of like Bruce Campbell from Evil Dead. You know, it's been made into a kind of lantern-jawed hero kind of face. It doesn't look quite like Sam Neill, you know.
Well, it is meant to be him, because you get a pretty good close-up where in the third alley scene where he actually rips the whole Hobbs End horror bit off. Yeah. And it's definitely his face.
If this were EFAP, they would question why the older movie poster is put over the new movie poster.
That's what went through my head.
I think it's meant to imply. I think it's meant to imply him, but I don't think the artwork actually is meant. I think it's meant to slip a little bit. It doesn't look quite like the actor playing. You know, they've got somebody to paint Sam Neill. They could have done a better job. I think it's meant to sort of be a little bit vague, and it's like, is it him? Is it Sutter Kane? Is it? And as I say, I looked at it. I thought, oh, it's Bruce Campbell. I don't know why.
I just took it as because it's Kane's own work, and there's clearly a style to it. So I thought it was it's a stylized.
That's it. Yeah, stylized.
Yeah.
I should also.
It's him.
I should also point out on the poster that the director of the film is John Carpenter and the writer is Michael DeLucia. So,
you love to see it.
We are very meta. We are at the end of the film, and we are rather on the naughty step, Super Nanny wise. So I'll have to ask further thoughts to be brief, and probably I think I have to move us to scores and closing thoughts. And I'm sort of sorry to do so. I should not have scheduled the BBFC history on a day we're covering In the Mouth of Madness, because there is so much to say about it.
Well,
but, alas.
I think you should compilate all the thoughts together in an article and send it to the Wellington Project. I think that'd be a very good idea.
Would you like me to write up tonight's BBFC history? Because
I think you could just do all of it together in one big article, or maybe do that and then split it up.
Well, I am thinking like the way it's done on stream, certainly the early ones, I think it's worth me re-recording it with a new presentation, but that's for a future matter. At this point, if you don't mind me asking, I think we have to move on to closing thoughts and scores. So, Haryan, would you like to go first?
This one I hate to put a number on because it's so weird. As I said, most of this film is spectacle, so if you don't really care about plot too much, this is probably one of the better films you can actually watch that's a horror film, because it's all well done, all that, and it's the way it's justified in the plot, though, which is how I mainly watch films and what I enjoy taking away from them. It's as I say, things happen, and things do literally just randomly happen, but it's explained as, it's the writer making things randomly happen. So technically it's a 12 out of 12 film, because what the plot is this is a book written by someone, that book is bad. So if I'm specifically, and the film based off it, so if I'm specifically reviewing that, it's probably about 4 or 5. If I'm reviewing the film as a whole with that in kind of the meta, it's not even, it is the plot, but it's kind of a meta plot to the plot within the film, which is why it's so hard to convey this thought. It's probably closer to an 8. Something like that. It's definitely in the top half, because I do like that. I do really, and this is because of the way it's written. The themes we've gone through do come across quite well. Free will, God is dead. Because when I came into this, I was wondering, why is he doing crosses everywhere? I don't really get that. But we go through it more and more, and it's the Nietzsche thing. He's desperate to get back to believing in God, so he doesn't have to. Well, basically, so he can have his, if not free will, at least it's not at the hands of some other author who's making his life hell, which I kind of enjoyed. It's a hard plot to really say what the through line is when you just say the whole film is basically a film that's an adaptation of some guy who wrote a book. And that internal book is basically all spectacle, with a kind of through line of him trying to investigate it, only to find out he's the main character of the book and has no free will. I think that's just the best way I can put it. And how do you put a number to that?
It's tough. I mean, I do think he leaves the book, but that's okay.
It's hard. I mean, that's fine. I mean, that's why this film works as well. There's so many interpretations on that level as well. So I don't even know if that's objectively right, that if he left or not, and it's hard to tell. So I guess on that alone, it's an 8 out of 12 burgers. Some cheese in there. I found quite a lot of this funny. Plus, it had Little Annie. So there's a
It did have Little
there.
Annie. Oh, surely Little Annie gets you up to 9.
No,
surely.
No, it's not how it works.
Oh, okay. You're a hard man to please.
No, 8.
But I can respect that. Okay, 8. Okay, okay. How about yourself, Simon? If it's confusing, for arcane reasons, we use a score out of 12 burgers.
Okay. Yeah. I would probably go with a 9, actually. Again, I'm not thinking of it holistically as, would I, watch this film to relax or enjoy? I like talking and thinking about it, though, because I think it's very stimulating, content in the film, a very interesting kind of, allegory, if you like. I think, when you talked about closing thoughts there, I thought at the end of the film, the character, sort of the epidemic has taken over the world, and he ends up being freed by everybody else being infected in the world, and it's kind of says to me, it's like, the apocalypse, it always kind of eventually, it just sort of empties out, and it becomes about, ultimately the isolation of the individual, sort of trapped in their own fantasies, which are born out of cooperating with ideology, which comes through culture, like pop culture. So I think it's a kind of lonely sort of idea at the end. It's very much reminding me of, like, again, in the 80s, before this, you had things like EST training in America, which was like mass production therapy that people did, Erhard seminar training. And it was about people sort of stripping back the layers of their anxiety and their personality and identity. And it very much left people, at the end product of this training was people often very much felt like they didn't discover anything inside. They peeled back the layers like an onion, and it didn't reveal anything. And there was a kind of sort of people accepting a sort of being empty consumers, in some way. And I think that's kind of where the film leaves me. He's kind of, literally alone in the cinema, enjoying the replay of his own life and going mad.
The world has ended. Go consume product and get excited about next apocalypse.
Yeah, everything in culture is this just sick recursion, going back and back and back again, having another bite, having another bite, having another bite, and just being glutted on this empty sort of trash in a way. That's not to dismiss the horror genre, but I think Carpenter's talking about the phenomenon of the propagation and the commercialization of horror. He's again, and it's not addressing a kind of emptiness.
He has made something knowingly tropey, and Trent has a logical response to it of a kind, which is just laugh at it, recognize the absurdity. How would you give a score to that? Was it 9 then?
I would say 9 overall. I mean, as I say, I'm trying to reach a balance between. I think there is actually substance to this film, and I think it gives the lie to the notion that people think of horror films as being entirely frivolous. I think Carpenter, especially, he writes with a very strong purpose. It's not necessarily about just the tantalization of horrific sequences or shock or anything like that. Especially I was struck when I watched They Live last night about this as well. That there's he's saying something more than just cheap thrills and kind of gore. He's pushing you to talk about culture itself, the modern era.
Most definitely. Yeah. Score-wise for me, I mean, I'm always going to be a little more biased. There's a degree of horror literacy in this that bumps up the score for me. I'm about a 10. I think this has got a heck of a lot to say, as we've demonstrated. The horror literacy is great. It walks that fine line between kind of knowingly filling something with tropes and telling you it's filling it with tropes, but still trying to wring something effective out of that. Where I would knock points off is that I don't think we're ever meant to have an emotional investment in the characters all that much. and there are a few bits that can get just a tad clunky. You end up inevitably getting detached a bit from the story when you realize a lot of stuff happening is arbitrary. So those are just little bits that I fall out of, and I do find the pacing at the end is a bit difficult. It's just the pacing falls apart a tad there. But there's so much in this, and it's so rich in ideas, and not just the standard ideas of the time, but kind of advancements on that, taking them in an angle that no one else has really done, that I think is still challenging and still super relevant today, that earns it a high score. So I would stick with a very strong 10. And that is where I think we're going to have to leave off. So we darn it, John, got us over the 3-hour mark. We were so good. We're so good. I blame the BBFC, of course. I mean, honestly, we could have done another hour on this very easily. So it's unfortunate, but I do aim for concision as best I can. So with that, I will bring this stream to a close. I would like to give very special thanks to the panel. Thank you so much, Harry. Glad that you enjoyed this one. I think we're on a bit of a roll.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed this one. It was weird because I could kind of turn my brain off for the first hour, and then the last half hour I was like, oh wow, there's a lot to go through here. Sweet. It kind of hit me like a ton of bricks.
Oh, we've had 2 good ones in a row. I'm so chuffed. And Simon, thank you so much for coming on.
Brilliant. Had a great time. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I want to leave people with that, I think one of the most powerful lines in the film. Every species can smell its own extinction.
It's a good one. It's a good one. We've got plenty coming up. We got the shills out. People's links are in the description. So please do check them out. And I'm definitely inviting you back, Simon. You're fantastic. Now, the important question, homework. What is it? What is that homework? What are you meant to do next? What are you going to fill the hours with? Well, our next arc, as you voted for, is psychological horror. It's mostly quite modern. We'll probably return to it and do a lot of older stuff, but the arc is focusing on more modern psychological horror. So a little bit of an overlap with Lovecraft, but not too much, I hope. And the one we're leading with is going to be Jacob's Ladder. That's Jacob's Ladder with Tim Robbins, directed by, I believe, Adrian Lyne, and massively influential on Silent Hill. So Trig is going to come back on and join us for that. He got dibs on Jacob's Ladder the second I mentioned it on stream, so I'm very interested to hear what he says about that. So get your watching. It's the classic Jacob's Ladder and not the terrible remake. Okay? That is your homework for next week. I'm going to leave it there. If you didn't see the Black Mirror video, check it out. I'm really happy with it. Check out my guests if you haven't already, and I'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for keeping the chat nice and lively, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you next week. Thanks, y'all. Cheers.